The ancient Near East, that crucible of civilization where writing was born and cities first rose from the alluvial plains, has always been a realm of competing powers. For millennia, the story of human advancement centered on Mesopotamia, on Egypt, on the fertile crescents and river valleys where agriculture made possible the leisure to think, to build, to conquer. But alongside these famous centers, another civilization emerged on the Iranian plateau, less celebrated in popular memory, yet no less consequential. The story of how Iran might have ascended to become the world's preeminent superpower begins not with any single dramatic moment, but with the deep roots of a culture that would prove remarkably resilient across the ages. Around 3,200 years before the Common Era, in the lowlands of southwestern Iran, near the modern province of Khuzestan, the Proto-Elamite civilization began its rise. The site of Susa, which would remain important for thousands of years, became a center of learning and commerce. Here, scribes developed an early writing system, independent of, but contemporary with the cuneiform traditions developing in Mesopotamia proper. The establishment of urban centers across the Iranian plateau marked the beginning of a distinct civilizational trajectory, one that would interact with, but remain separate from the Mesopotamian world to the west. By 2,700 years before the Common Era, Elam had organized itself into a kingdom with Susa as its capital. Trade networks stretched between Elamite merchants and the cities of Mesopotamia, creating wealth that funded ambitious engineering projects. The Elamites developed sophisticated irrigation systems in the foothills of the Zagros Mountains, demonstrating an understanding of hydrology that would become characteristic of Iranian civilization. Water management in this harsh, arid landscape was not merely an engineering challenge, but a fundamental determinant of political power. The discovery and exploitation of copper mines in central Iran, around 2,500 years before the Common Era, gave Elam a crucial advantage in the Bronze Age world. Control over metal resources meant control over military technology, and the advancement of bronze metallurgy in Elamite workshops produced weapons and tools that made the kingdom a force to respect. The construction of the Great Ziggurat at Choga Zanbil, begun in this period and completed centuries later, around 1250 before the Common Era, demonstrated both the organizational capacity of the Elamite state and its religious sophistication. This massive stepped pyramid, dedicated to the god Inshushinak, stood as physical proof that Iranian civilization could match the architectural achievements of Mesopotamia. The most consequential development in Iranian history, however, came around 2,000 years before the Common Era, when Indo-Iranian peoples began their long migration from the Central Asian steppes onto the Iranian plateau. These were horse peoples, nomadic warriors, who brought with them not only a new language family, but also military technologies that would reshape the region. The horse, domesticated on the steppes and introduced to Iran by these migrants, would become central to Iranian military power for the next 3 millennia. The separation of Iranian language groups from their Indo-Aryan cousins during this migration created the linguistic foundation for a distinct Iranian identity, one that would persist through countless political transformations. By 1,500 years before the Common Era, 2 of these Iranian groups had established distinct tribal confederations that would shape the future. The Medes settled in the northwestern regions of the plateau, in the area around modern Hamadan, while the Persians made their home in the southwest, in the region called Persis, or Fars. The introduction of iron metallurgy to the Iranian plateau during this period gave these Iranian peoples a technological edge that would prove decisive in their eventual dominance over the region. Iron weapons and tools were superior to bronze, and those who mastered ironworking gained military and economic advantages that compounded over generations. The Median tribes consolidated around the city of Ecbatana beginning around 1,000 years before the Common Era. Meanwhile, Persian tribes were establishing themselves firmly in Fars province, and the early concepts of Zoroastrianism were taking shape, though the religion would not be formalized for centuries. These religious ideas, emphasizing the cosmic struggle between truth and lie, between order and chaos, would profoundly influence Iranian political philosophy and provide an ideological foundation distinct from the polytheistic traditions of Mesopotamia or the nascent monotheism emerging among the Hebrews. The first reliable historical records of the Medes appear in Assyrian documents from 835 years before the Common Era, when Median chiefs paid tribute to the Assyrian king Shalmaneser III. This marks the beginning of documented Iranian history, the point where archaeology gives way to written records. For the next century, the Medes existed as a collection of tribal confederations, sometimes united, more often fractious, always under pressure from the mighty Assyrian Empire that dominated Mesopotamia. Everything changed in 728 years before the Common Era, when Deioces, known to the Medes as Diuku, managed to unify the Median tribes. The foundation of the Median kingdom, with its capital at Ecbatana, represented the first Iranian state capable of challenging the established powers of the Near East. Deioces constructed a fortified palace complex that became the administrative heart of an increasingly centralized monarchy. When his son Phraates, called Kshatrita in Median, succeeded him in 675 years before the Common Era, the new king immediately began expanding Median territory into northern and central Iran. This brought the Medes into direct conflict with Assyria, the superpower of the age, and Phraates died in battle against the Assyrians. His son, Cyaxares, who became king in 653 years before the Common Era, would prove to be one of the great military reformers of antiquity. Recognizing that tribal levies could not stand against the professional armies of Assyria, Cyaxares created a standing army organized along rational lines. He introduced cavalry units as a core component of his military, taking advantage of Iranian horsemanship, and organized his infantry into disciplined divisions rather than tribal warbands. These reforms transformed the Median military from a collection of tribal warriors into a professional fighting force capable of sustained campaigns. The consequences became clear in 612 years before the Common Era, when Cyaxares allied with Nabopolassar of Babylon against their common Assyrian enemy. The combined Medo-Babylonian forces besieged and destroyed Nineveh, the Assyrian capital, in one of the ancient world's most consequential battles. The Assyrian Empire, which had dominated the Near East for centuries, was obliterated. Media emerged from the ruins as the dominant power in northern Mesopotamia and Anatolia. For the first time, an Iranian power had defeated the established order and seized control of territories that had been ruled from Mesopotamia for millennia. Cyaxares pressed his advantage, expanding Median control westward into Anatolia. In 585 years before the Common Era, at the Battle of Hales, Median forces clashed with the armies of Lydia, the wealthy kingdom in western Anatolia. According to the Greek historian Herodotus, a solar eclipse occurred during the battle, frightening both armies into agreeing to a peace treaty. The eclipse, which modern astronomers have confirmed occurred on May 28th of that year, became one of the first precisely datable events in ancient history. The peace treaty that followed established the Median Empire at its maximum extent, stretching from Anatolia in the west to Central Asia in the east. For a brief moment, Media stood as the greatest power in the known world. Yet empires, built on conquest, often contain the seeds of their own transformation. In 559 years before the Common Era, Cyrus II, who would be known to history as Cyrus the Great, became king of Persis in southern Iran. At this time, Persis was a vassal state of the Median Empire, and Persian kings ruled only at the pleasure of their Median overlords. But Cyrus was an ambitious man who began quietly consolidating power among the Persian tribes, building alliances, and preparing for a bid for independence. The revolt came in 553 years before the Common Era, when Cyrus openly rebelled against King Astyages of Media. The Persian-Median War that followed was not simply a rebellion of vassal against overlord, but a contest for the future direction of Iranian civilization. Cyrus found support among disaffected Median nobles who resented Astyages' rule and he skillfully exploited divisions within the Median elite. At the Battle of Pasargadae, in 550 years before the Common Era, Cyrus achieved a decisive victory. The Median Empire was absorbed into what would become the Achaemenid Persian Empire, and Cyrus established his capital at Pasargadae in Fars province, the heartland of Persian power. This transition from Median to Persian dominance represented not a break in Iranian civilization, but a continuation under new management. Cyrus maintained many Median administrative practices and employed Median officials in his government. The fusion of Persian and Median traditions created a hybrid Iranian identity that would characterize the Achaemenid Empire. Rather than destroying what the Medes had built, Cyrus inherited their imperial project and expanded it beyond anything Cyaxares had imagined. In 547 years before the Common Era, Cyrus turned his attention westward and launched a campaign against Lydia, the wealthy kingdom ruled by Croesus, a man whose riches were legendary. The defeat of Croesus and the annexation of Lydia brought the Persian Empire to the coast of the Aegean Sea, placing it in direct contact with the Greek city-states of Ionia. Control of these prosperous trading cities brought enormous wealth into Persian coffers and established Iran as a bridge between East and West. But Cyrus's greatest achievement came in 539 years before the Common Era with the conquest of the Babylonian Empire. The city of Babylon, one of the ancient world's greatest metropolises, fell to Persian forces without a major battle. Cyrus's propaganda presented him as a liberator rather than a conqueror, and the Cyrus Cylinder, a clay document issued after the conquest, proclaimed a policy of religious tolerance that stood in stark contrast to the brutal practices of earlier Near Eastern empires. The liberation of the Jews from their Babylonian captivity, permitted by Cyrus's decree, earned him a unique place in Jewish tradition as a Messiah figure, the only non-Jew accorded this title in the Hebrew Bible. When Cyrus died in 530 years before the Common Era, during a campaign against Massagetae tribes in Central Asia, he left behind an empire that stretched from the Indus River to the Mediterranean Sea. His son Cambyses II inherited this vast domain and immediately set about expanding it further. In 525 years before the Common Era, Cambyses conquered Egypt at the Battle of Pelusium, making Egypt a Persian satrapy. This achievement made the Persian Empire the first in history to unite 3 continents under a single ruler, controlling territories in Asia, Africa, and Europe through its Anatolian possessions. The death of Cambyses in 522 years before the Common Era in Syria triggered a succession crisis that threatened to tear the empire apart. Civil war erupted as multiple claimants fought for the throne. From this chaos emerged Darius I, who would be remembered as Darius the Great, one of the most capable administrators in ancient history. After eliminating his rivals, Darius documented his rise to power in the Behistun inscription, a massive rock carving featuring text in 3 languages: Old Persian, Elamite, and Babylonian. This inscription would later provide the key to deciphering cuneiform script, much as the Rosetta Stone would unlock Egyptian hieroglyphics. Darius understood that conquest alone could not sustain an empire. Beginning in 521 years before the Common Era, he implemented sweeping administrative reforms that would define Persian imperial governance for the next 2 centuries. He reorganized the empire into 20 satrapies, each governed by a satrap who wielded considerable local authority but remained accountable to the king through an elaborate system of checks and balances. Royal inspectors, known as the king's eyes and ears, traveled throughout the empire, ensuring that satraps remained loyal and that imperial policies were implemented uniformly. Darius standardized weights, measures, and coinage throughout the empire, introducing the daric, a gold coin that would become the international currency of the ancient world. The use of Aramaic as the imperial administrative language allowed bureaucrats from Egypt to India to communicate efficiently, creating a unified administrative culture that transcended local languages and customs. In 518 years before the Common Era, Darius began construction of Persepolis, a ceremonial capital in the Persian heartland of Fars province. Unlike the earlier capitals of Pasargadae, Susa, and Ecbatana, which served administrative functions, Persepolis was designed specifically to showcase Persian imperial ideology. Its grand staircases depicted representatives from all corners of the empire, bringing tribute to the King of Kings, a visual representation of the multicultural, multi-ethnic nature of Achaemenid rule. The site would take over a century to complete, with successive rulers adding their own contributions. Equally impressive was the royal road system that Darius constructed, with the main artery stretching 1,677 miles from Susa to Sardis in western Anatolia. This network of roads, maintained at imperial expense with regular rest stations, allowed messages to travel across the empire in a matter of days rather than months. The postal relay system, known as Chapar Khane, employed mounted couriers who would ride from station to station, changing horses at each stop. Greek historian Herodotus would later marvel at this system, writing that neither snow, nor rain, nor heat, nor darkness stayed these couriers from the swift completion of their appointed rounds, a phrase that would echo through postal services into the modern era. Having secured the internal administration of his empire, Darius looked beyond its existing borders. In 513 years before the Common Era, he launched a campaign into Scythia, the steppes north of the Black Sea. This expedition marked the first significant Persian military venture into Europe. Though the campaign against the nomadic Scythians proved inconclusive, Darius succeeded in conquering Thrace and compelling the submission of Macedonia. For the first time, Persian power extended into the European mainland, and the Greek city-states found themselves with an expansionist empire on their doorstep. The Ionian Greeks, living in cities along the western coast of Anatolia, had been under Persian rule since Cyrus the Great's conquest of Lydia. In 499 years before the Common Era, these cities revolted against Persian authority. The Ionian Revolt, which would last 6 years, received limited support from Athens and Eretria on mainland Greece. Rebel forces even managed to march inland and burn Sardis, though they were unable to capture the citadel. Darius suppressed the revolt by 494 years before the Common Era, with a decisive naval victory at the Battle of Lade. But he neither forgot nor forgave the mainland Greeks, who had aided the rebels. He reportedly ordered a servant to remind him 3 times before dinner each day to remember the Athenians. In 490 years before the Common Era, Darius dispatched a naval expedition under commanders Datis and Artaphernes to punish Athens and Eretria. The Persians destroyed Eretria and enslaved its population before landing at Marathon, approximately 26 miles from Athens. There, a smaller Athenian force achieved a surprising victory through superior tactics, exploiting the weakness of the Persian center while crushing both wings. The defeat at Marathon stunned the Persian court, accustomed to viewing Greek hoplites as mercenaries rather than formidable opponents. Darius began planning a much larger invasion, but he died in 486 years before the Common Era, before he could launch it. His son Xerxes inherited both the throne and the unfinished business in Greece. Xerxes spent 4 years preparing for an invasion of unprecedented scale. In 480 years before the Common Era, he led perhaps the largest military force yet assembled in ancient history across the Hellespont into Europe. Greek sources claimed millions of soldiers, though modern historians estimate the actual force at perhaps 200,000, still enormous by ancient standards. The expedition included extensive logistical preparation, with supply depots established along the route and a canal dug through the Athos Peninsula to avoid the dangerous waters that had destroyed a Persian fleet a decade earlier. The invasion initially proceeded according to plan. At Thermopylae, a small Spartan-led force under King Leonidas attempted to hold a narrow pass but was outflanked and destroyed after 3 days of fighting. The self-sacrifice of Leonidas and his 300 Spartans would become legendary in Greek culture, but it did little to slow the Persian advance. Xerxes marched into central Greece, captured Athens, and burned the temples on the Acropolis in retaliation for the burning of Sardis. The Athenian population had evacuated to the island of Salamis and the Peloponnese. What followed would prove one of the most consequential naval battles in ancient history. The Greek fleet, led by the Athenian commander Themistocles, lured the larger Persian navy into the narrow straits of Salamis. In the confined waters, the Persian numerical advantage became a liability, as ships collided with one another, and Greek triremes used their superior maneuverability to devastating effect. Xerxes watched from a throne on the shore as his navy was destroyed. The Battle of Salamis, in late 480 years before the Common Era, forced Xerxes to reconsider his strategy. Without naval superiority, supplying a massive army in hostile territory became precarious. He withdrew to Asia, leaving his general Mardonius with a substantial force to continue the campaign. The following year, in 479 years before the Common Era, the Greeks assembled a coalition army that met the Persians at Plataea in Boeotia. The battle initially favored the Persians, but when Mardonius was killed, leading a cavalry charge, Persian resistance collapsed. On the same day, according to Greek tradition, a Greek fleet destroyed the remaining Persian ships at Mycale on the Ionian coast. The twin disasters at Plataea and Mycale ended Persian attempts to conquer mainland Greece. The Greco-Persian wars continued for another 3 decades, with fighting in Cyprus, Egypt, and the eastern Mediterranean, but the empire never again mounted an invasion of the Greek heartland. In 449 years before the Common Era, the Peace of Callias formally ended hostilities. The treaty recognized Greek independence, while confirming Persian control over the Greek cities of Asia Minor, Cyprus, and Egypt. From a Persian perspective, the wars had been a frontier conflict that ended with the empire retaining the vast majority of its territories and wealth. The loss of prestige from the defeats at Marathon, Salamis, and Plataea was real, but not existential. The Achaemenid Empire remained the dominant power in the Near East, controlling a vast territory from Libya to the Indus River and from the Caucasus to the Indian Ocean. For the next century, the Persian Empire focused on consolidating its holdings rather than expanding them. Artaxerxes I, who ruled from 465 to 424 years before the Common Era, faced rebellions in Egypt and continued skirmishing with Greek city-states, but maintained overall imperial stability. His successors in the late 5th and early 4th centuries before the Common Era found that Persian gold and diplomatic intrigue could accomplish what Persian armies could not. The empire played Greek city-states against one another, supporting first Sparta against Athens in the Peloponnesian War, then supporting Athens and others against an increasingly powerful Sparta. In 387 years before the Common Era, Artaxerxes II imposed the King's Peace, also known as the Peace of Antalcidas, on the warring Greek states. The terms of this treaty confirmed Persian sovereignty over the Greek cities of Asia Minor and established Persia as the arbiter of Greek interstate relations. Greek cities that had been fighting Persian domination for a century now found themselves appealing to the great king to settle their disputes with one another. This represented the high point of Persian diplomatic influence in the Aegean world. Yet beneath the surface, structural weaknesses were accumulating within the empire. The satrapal system that had provided stability under strong monarchs became a source of fragmentation under weaker ones. Powerful satraps began acting as independent rulers, raising their own armies and even waging war against one another. Egypt repeatedly broke away and established independent native dynasties, requiring costly reconquests. The great satraps' revolt in the middle of the 4th century before the Common Era saw several Western satraps openly rebel against central authority, and though the revolt was suppressed, it revealed the centrifugal forces threatening imperial unity. Artaxerxes III, who ruled from 358 to 338 years before the Common Era, proved a capable but brutal ruler who restored order through mass executions and reconquered Egypt in 343 years before the Common Era. His assassination by the eunuch Bagoas in 338 years before the Common Era, followed by the poisoning of his successor Artaxerxes IV in 336 years before the Common Era, left the empire in disarray at precisely the moment when a new threat emerged from Macedonia. Philip II of Macedon had transformed his kingdom from a backwater into the dominant military power in Greece through tactical innovations and diplomatic skill. He created the Macedonian phalanx, armed with long sarissa pikes, and combined it with heavy cavalry charges to devastating effect. After defeating the Greek city-states at Chaeronea in 338 years before the Common Era, Philip began preparing for an invasion of the Persian Empire, framing it as a pan-Hellenic crusade to avenge Xerxes' invasion a century and a half earlier. His assassination in 336 years before the Common Era might have derailed these plans, but his 20-year-old son Alexander proved even more capable and ambitious. In 334 years before the Common Era, Alexander crossed the Hellespont with an army of approximately 40,000 infantry and 5,000 cavalry, launching an invasion that would destroy the Achaemenid Empire. Darius III, who had become king only 2 years earlier after Bagoas placed him on the throne, faced the Macedonian invasion with an empire weakened by internal strife and assassination plots. The first major engagement occurred at the Granicus River in northwestern Anatolia, where Alexander's tactical brilliance and personal courage in leading cavalry charges overwhelmed the Persian forces. The victory opened Asia Minor to Macedonian conquest, and Greek cities that had been under Persian rule for 2 centuries welcomed Alexander as a liberator. The following year, 333 years before the Common Era, Darius personally led a massive army to confront Alexander at Issus in southern Anatolia. Despite his numerical advantage, Darius positioned his forces poorly in terrain that negated their superiority in numbers. When Alexander led a devastating cavalry charge directly at the Persian center, where Darius commanded, the great king fled the battlefield, abandoning not only his army but his mother, wife, and daughters. The Battle of Issus shattered Persian morale and demonstrated that the empire's military, which had not faced a first-rate opponent since the Greco-Persian Wars, could not match Macedonian professionalism and tactical innovation. Alexander spent the next 2 years conquering the Levant and Egypt, securing his supply lines and flanks before advancing into the heart of the Persian Empire. In 331 years before the Common Era, Darius made his final stand at Gaugamela, near Arbela, in northern Mesopotamia. He assembled perhaps the largest army the Achaemenid Empire had ever fielded, drawing contingents from every corner of his realm. The flat terrain favored Persian cavalry and chariots, and Darius even leveled the ground in advance to facilitate chariot charges. Yet Alexander's tactical genius again prevailed. He created a gap in the Persian line through feints and probing attacks, then led his companion cavalry through this gap directly at Darius. For the second time, the great king fled, and his army disintegrated as word spread that their monarch had abandoned them. The 3 great cities of the Persian heartland fell in rapid succession. Babylon opened its gates without resistance. Susa surrendered and yielded its vast treasuries. Persepolis, the ceremonial capital, was captured in early 330 years before the Common Era. What happened next remains controversial among historians. Whether through deliberate policy or drunken accident, the magnificent palaces of Persepolis burned. Greek sources claim Alexander ordered the destruction during a symposium after the courtesan Thais suggested it would avenge Xerxes' burning of Athens. Other accounts suggest it was a calculated act to signal the definitive end of the Achaemenid dynasty and Persian resistance. The destruction of Persepolis, with its artistic treasures and accumulated wealth of dynasties, marked a symbolic end point. Darius fled east to Media and then to Bactria, hoping to raise new armies in the eastern provinces. Alexander pursued relentlessly. In 330 years before the Common Era, Bessus, the satrap of Bactria, murdered Darius to prevent his capture and proclaimed himself king. Alexander gave Darius a royal burial and hunted down Bessus, executing him for regicide. The Achaemenid Empire, which had endured for more than 2 centuries and ruled from the Mediterranean to Central Asia, had fallen to a Macedonian king, not yet 30 years old. Alexander claimed the Persian throne by right of conquest and began the extraordinary transformation from Macedonian king to great king of Asia the traditional structure of the Achaemenid state remained largely intact. The satrapy system continued with minor modifications, though Alexander replaced Persian governors with Macedonian and Greek administrators in key positions. He adopted Persian court ceremonial, wearing Persian dress and requiring subjects to perform proskynesis, the ritual prostration before the king. These adoptions outraged his Macedonian companions, who saw them as betrayals of Greek freedom and equality. The tension between Alexander's Macedonian identity and his assumption of Persian imperial traditions created friction that would persist throughout his remaining years. He married Roxana, daughter of a Sogdian nobleman, in 327 before the Common Era, and later married Statera, daughter of Darius, and Parysatis, daughter of Artaxerxes III, cementing his claim to Persian legitimacy through royal bloodlines. The integration of Persian soldiers into his army proceeded despite opposition from Macedonian officers. Alexander recruited 30,000 Persian youths to be trained in Macedonian military techniques and armed in the phalanx style. Persian cavalry units, which had proven their effectiveness at Gaugamela, were incorporated into the combined arms forces. At Susa, in 324 before the Common Era, Alexander orchestrated a mass wedding ceremony in which 90 Macedonian and Greek officers married Persian noblewomen. Alexander himself formally married Statera and Parysatis in Persian rites. 10,000 of his soldiers married their Asian companions in the same ceremony. The fusion of Greek and Persian elites was to form the ruling class of a unified empire spanning two civilizations. Alexander died in Babylon in June of 323, before the Common Era, at age 32. Fever consumed him over 11 days. Modern theories suggest malaria, typhoid fever, or poisoning, though ancient sources provide contradictory accounts. He left no clear successor. His half-brother, Philip Aridaeus, suffered from mental disabilities. His wife, Roxana, was pregnant with the future Alexander IV. Neither could rule immediately. The empire Alexander had conquered fractured as his generals, the Diadochi, carved out territories for themselves. More than 4 decades of warfare followed, as these successors fought to claim portions of Alexander's realm or restore it under their own rule. Perdiccas initially held regency over the nominal joint kings, Philip Aridaeus and the infant Alexander IV. He controlled Babylon and the central territories. Ptolemy secured Egypt immediately, establishing himself as satrap and then king of the wealthiest province. Antigonus, Monophthalmus, held Anatolia and eventually claimed the entire empire. Lysimachus took Thrace. Cassander controlled Macedonia. Seleucus, who had served as Alexander's cavalry commander, initially held a minor position, but would eventually claim the largest share of the former Persian territories. In 321 before the Common Era, Perdiccas invaded Egypt to force Ptolemy's submission. The invasion failed disastrously. Perdiccas was murdered by his own officers after a failed Nile crossing. The empire's unity died with him. The wars of succession escalated. In 316, Antigonus emerged as the most powerful successor, controlling Anatolia, Syria, and Mesopotamia. He aimed to reunite Alexander's empire under his rule. Seleucus held Babylon as Antigonus's subordinate, but fled to Ptolemy's court in 315 after falling out with his master. The coalition against Antigonus formed from necessity. Ptolemy, Cassander, Lysimachus, and the exiled Seleucus united against the would-be universal monarch. Battle of Gaza in 312 before the Common Era saw Ptolemy and Seleucus defeat Antigonus's son Demetrius. Seleucus immediately marched east to reclaim Babylon, which opened its gates to him. This moment marked the true foundation of what became the Seleucid Empire. Seleucus controlled Babylonia and moved swiftly to assert authority over the eastern satrapies. Persia, Media, Bactria, and Sogdiana recognized his rule over the next several years as he campaigned through the former Achaemenid heartlands. The eastern territories presented unique challenges. Chandragupta Maurya had unified northern India and established the Mauryan Empire, expanding into territories Alexander had briefly occupied in the Indus Valley. Seleucus campaigned in the east in 305 before the Common Era, crossing into the Indian frontier regions. Rather than pursue costly warfare, Seleucus negotiated a treaty with Chandragupta. The Seleucids ceded territories east of the Hindu Kush Mountains, including Arakosha, Gedrosia, and Paropamisidae, in exchange for 500 war elephants. These elephants would prove decisive in later battles against his rivals. The treaty stabilized the eastern frontier and allowed Seleucus to focus on consolidating the Iranian plateau. The Iranian territories under Seleucid rule maintained significant continuity with Achaemenid administration. The satrapy system persisted. Persian remained an administrative language alongside Greek. The established infrastructure of roads, postal systems, and provincial governance continued operating much as before. Seleucus founded cities throughout the empire in the Greek model, establishing colonies of Macedonian and Greek veterans as military settlements. These cities served as administrative centers and garrisons, islands of Hellenic culture in the vast Iranian landscape. Seleucia on the Tigris, founded near Babylon, became one of the great metropolises of the Hellenistic world, with a population reaching 600,000 at its height. The final confrontation between the successors came in 301 before the Common Era. Antigonus, now 80 years old, still commanded resources across Anatolia, Syria, and parts of Mesopotamia. His son Demetrius, called Poliorcetes or the Besiger, was among the most talented military commanders of the age. The coalition of Seleucus, Lysimachus, Cassander, and Ptolemy assembled their forces. At Ipsus, in Phrygia, the armies met in 301. Seleucus's war elephants, obtained from Chandragupta, broke the enemy cavalry and surrounded Antigonus's infantry. Antigonus died on the battlefield, struck down by javelins. Demetrius escaped, but Antigonus's empire was partitioned. Seleucus gained Syria and secured his western borders to the Mediterranean coast. The territorial division at Ipsus established the basic structure of the Hellenistic world that would endure for generations. Seleucus ruled an empire stretching from Syria to Bactria, the largest territorial state in the Hellenistic world and inheritor of most of the former Persian Empire. He adopted Persian court ceremonial and governed through a combination of Macedonian military power and Persian administrative traditions. The fusion of Greek and Iranian cultures accelerated. Greek became the language of the upper classes and administration in major cities, while Persian, Aramaic, and other local languages persisted in the countryside and provinces. Religious tolerance followed Achaemenid precedent. Zoroastrianism continued as the dominant faith among Iranians. Greek cults and temples spread through the new cities. Babylonian priesthoods retained their privileges and property. In 281 before the Common Era, Seleucus prepared to invade Macedonia and claim the throne that had belonged to Alexander. At age 77, he crossed into Europe but was assassinated by Ptolemy Ceraunus, son of Ptolemy I, at the Hellespont. His son, Antiochus I, succeeded him, inheriting an empire already showing strains. The vast distances from the Mediterranean to Central Asia made centralized control difficult. The eastern satrapies remained semi-autonomous, governed by Seleucid appointees who operated with significant independence. Greek settlers concentrated in cities remained a minority among vast Iranian, Mesopotamian, and other subject populations who maintained their languages, religions, and customs. The Seleucid Empire represented a hybrid state, attempting to unite Greek military and urban culture with Persian imperial administration and Iranian traditions. This synthesis worked effectively in the western provinces, where Seleucid power remained strong. In the Iranian plateau and eastern regions, however, the combination proved less stable. The Greek cities remained foreign implants. The Iranian nobility chafed under foreign rule. The economic center of the empire lay in Mesopotamia and Syria, drawing administrative attention westward. The Iranian heartland, which had been the core of the Achaemenid Empire, became periphery to rulers focused on the Mediterranean world and conflicts with Ptolemaic Egypt. In the mid-3rd century before the Common Era, two movements began that would restore Iranian independence. In the northeast, Bactria, under its Greek governor Diodotus I, revolted around 250 before the Common Era. The Greco-Bactrian kingdom established itself as an independent Hellenistic state, ruling over Iranian and Central Asian populations with a Greek elite. The kingdom would endure for over a century, developing a unique synthesis of Greek and Iranian culture and even expanding into northern India. Far more significant for the future of the Iranian plateau was a second rebellion in the northeast. Parthia, the satrapy along the southeastern shore of the Caspian Sea, was a region of Iranian tribes speaking a northwestern Iranian language related to Median. Around 247 before the Common Era, a tribal leader named Arsaces led the Pani, a nomadic Iranian people from Central Asia, in a revolt against Seleucid authority. The dating of this event remains debated, with some sources placing it as early as 253 and others as late as 247. The Parthian era calendar, which became the official calendar of the later Parthian Empire, dated its beginning to 247. Arsaces and his brother Tiridates defeated the Seleucid satrap Andragoras, who had himself been attempting to establish independence. The Parni settled in Parthia, and Arsaces proclaimed himself king, founding what became the Arsacid dynasty. The Seleucid response was delayed by conflicts in the west. Antiochus II was engaged in wars against Ptolemaic Egypt and could not immediately address the northeastern rebellions. The Parthian state consolidated during this window of opportunity. Arsaces established a capital at Nisa, near the southern Caspian shore. The Parthian kingdom initially controlled only Parthia proper and parts of Hyrcania, a relatively small territory in the northeast corner of the Iranian plateau. The population was Iranian, related ethnically and linguistically to the Medes and Persians, though the ruling Pani tribe came from the nomadic Iranian peoples of Central Asia. The culture was Iranian, with significant continuity from the Achaemenid period in administrative practices and social organization. When Seleucus II finally turned his attention eastward in the 230s, Arsaces submitted nominally to Seleucid authority, but maintained de facto independence. The Seleucids faced more pressing threats in Anatolia and Syria. In 238 before the Common Era, Arsaces died and was succeeded by his brother Tiridates, who took the throne name Arsaces II, establishing a tradition where Parthian kings often adopted the dynastic name. The use of Arsaces as a throne name emphasized dynastic continuity and created some confusion in later historical sources about the sequence and identity of early Parthian rulers. Antiochus III, who became Seleucid king in 223 before the Common Era, was the last Seleucid monarch to seriously attempt to restore control over the Iranian plateau. Young and ambitious, he campaigned extensively in the east. In 212, he marched against Parthia. The Parthian king, now Arsaces II, initially resisted but eventually submitted to Seleucid forces and accepted vassal status. Antiochus continued east to Bactria, where he fought the Greco-Bactrian king Euthydemus. After initial Seleucid successes, a negotiated settlement recognized Bactrian independence in exchange for Euthydemus acknowledging nominal Seleucid suzerainty and providing elephants and supplies. Antiochus reached the Indian frontier and renewed the treaty with the Mauryan Empire before returning west. This eastern campaign of 212 to 205 earned him the epithet, the Great, and seemed to restore Seleucid authority over the Iranian territories. The restoration proved illusory. Antiochus turned his attention to the west and the Mediterranean. He challenged Rome's emerging dominance in Greece and Asia Minor, a decision with catastrophic consequences. The Roman-Seleucid War of 192 to 188 before the Common Era ended in decisive Roman victory. Battle of Magnesia in 190 saw the Seleucid army, despite numerical superiority and war elephants, defeated by Roman legions and their allies. The Treaty of Apamea in 188 stripped the Seleucids of Asia Minor, imposed enormous indemnities, and shattered Seleucid military power. Antiochus died in 187 while attempting to plunder a temple in Elam to pay the Roman indemnity. The Seleucid collapse opened opportunity for the Parthians. With Seleucid attention fixed on the Mediterranean and resources drained by Roman indemnities, the Iranian East was neglected. In 171 before the Common Era, Mithridates I became king of Parthia. He would transform the small Parthian state into an empire. Over a reign of nearly 40 years, Mithridates conducted systematic conquest of the Iranian plateau. His first campaign secured territories to the east, expanding Parthian control into Margiana and other Central Asian regions. Then he turned west toward the wealthy heartlands of the former Persian Empire. Around 160 before the Common Era, Mithridates I launched his campaign against Media, the ancient kingdom that had once ruled all of Iran before the rise of Cyrus the Great. The Seleucid satrap of Media, weakened by lack of support from the distant capital at Antioch and facing local unrest, could not mount effective resistance. Parthian forces occupied Ecbatana, the ancient Median capital, without major battle. Mithridates established Ecbatana as his western capital, deliberately connecting his rule to the pre-Alexandrian Iranian past. The fall of Media brought the entire Iranian plateau under Parthian control for the first time since Alexander's conquest. The symbolic importance was immense. No longer were the Parthians merely another Hellenistic successor state. They were the restorers of Iranian sovereignty over Iranian lands. The conquest of Media also brought enormous wealth. The region controlled major trade routes connecting Mesopotamia to Central Asia. Its cities were centers of commerce and craft production. Agricultural productivity in the Median valleys provided tax revenues far exceeding what the Parthian homeland could generate. Most importantly, control of Media gave Mithridates the resources to continue expansion. In 150 before the Common Era, he turned his attention to Mesopotamia, the richest prize of all. Mesopotamia, the land between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, had been the economic heart of every Near Eastern empire since Akkadian times. Its irrigated agriculture fed millions. Its cities, Babylon and Seleucia on the Tigris, were among the largest in the ancient world. Control of Mesopotamia would make Parthia wealthy beyond measure. The Seleucid Empire, despite its decline, still held Mesopotamia firmly. The region was too valuable to surrender without fight. Mithridates prepared his campaign carefully. He built alliances with local populations who chafed under Seleucid rule and Greek cultural dominance. Many Babylonians retained memories of Persian tolerance and self-governance under the Achaemenids. The Parthians, as Iranian people claiming the Achaemenid legacy, positioned themselves as liberators rather than conquerors. In 148 before the Common Era, Mithridates launched his invasion. His forces advanced down the Zagros Mountains into the Mesopotamian plain. Seleucid forces, divided between conflicts in the west and internal dynastic struggles, could not concentrate sufficient strength. City after city opened its gates to the Parthians. Seleucia on the Tigris, the great Hellenistic metropolis, founded by Seleucus I as his eastern capital, fell to Mithridates in 141 before the Common Era. The city had a population exceeding 500,000, rivaling Alexandria and Rome itself. Its capture demonstrated that Parthia was now a great power. The following year, 140 before the Common Era, Mithridates occupied Babylon. The ancient city, though no longer the political capital, remained symbolically crucial. Every conqueror of Mesopotamia since Cyrus the Great had sought legitimacy by taking the hands of Marduk in Babylonian temples. Mithridates followed this tradition, presenting himself as protector of Babylonian religion and culture. Local priesthoods, who had cooperated with Persian, Macedonian, and Seleucid rulers in turn, now transferred their allegiance to the Parthian king. The Babylonian astronomical diaries, cuneiform records, maintained continuously since the 8th century before the Common Era, recorded the regime change with their characteristic matter-of-fact precision. After centuries of Greek rule, Babylonia returned to Iranian sovereignty. The Seleucid king Demetrius II, young and ambitious, could not accept the loss of Mesopotamia. In 141 before the Common Era, he assembled a large army and marched east to reclaim the lost provinces. Initial Seleucid advances pushed Parthian forces back, recapturing several cities. Mithridates, however, employed tactics that would become characteristically Parthian. Rather than meeting the Seleucid army in pitched battle where Greek phalanx formations held advantage, Parthian cavalry harassed enemy supply lines, raided their camps, and avoided direct engagement. The Seleucid army advanced deeper into Parthian-controlled territory, farther from its supply bases. In 139 before the Common Era, the Parthians finally engaged Demetrius in battle and won decisively. More remarkably, they captured Demetrius himself. The Seleucid king spent the next decade in comfortable captivity, married to a Parthian princess, while the Seleucid Empire descended into civil war over succession. Mithridates capitalized on Seleucid chaos. By 138 before the Common Era, he controlled all Mesopotamia to the Euphrates River. He adopted the ancient Persian title Shahanshah, King of Kings, claiming succession to the Achaemenids. This was not mere propaganda. The Parthian Empire now ruled territories that had formed the core of the Persian Empire, the Iranian Plateau, Mesopotamia, and Media. The adoption of Persian imperial ideology distinguished Parthia from other Hellenistic kingdoms. While the Seleucids, Ptolemies, and other successor states were fundamentally Macedonian military monarchies ruling over foreign populations, the Parthians presented themselves as native Iranian rulers, restoring traditional Persian order. This ideology had practical implications. Local elites throughout the former Persian Empire had maintained memories and traditions from Achaemenid times. Appealing to this Persian heritage gave Parthian rule legitimacy that Greek dynasties could never achieve. Mithridates also revived Persian administrative practices. The empire was organized into satrapies, each governed by a satrap with considerable autonomy as long as taxes were paid and military contingents provided. This federal structure, inherited from Achaemenid practice, differed markedly from the more centralized Seleucid system. It proved remarkably durable, allowing the Parthian Empire to govern vast territories with ethnic and linguistic diversity. The Parthians did not impose cultural uniformity. Greek cities continued to function with their institutions. Babylonian temples maintained their priesthoods and astronomical observations. Jewish communities received confirmation of their privileges. This tolerance, modeled on Achaemenid precedents, created stability. Subject populations had less reason to rebel when their local customs were respected and their elites given roles in governance. The military system Mithridates developed would define Parthian power for centuries. The Parthian army centered on heavy and light cavalry rather than infantry. The heavy cavalry, called cataphracts, wore scale armor covering both rider and horse. Armed with long lances, they could deliver devastating charges. The light cavalry, mounted archers, were the Parthians' decisive tactical weapon. These horsemen, drawn from the Iranian nobility and tribal confederations, could shoot composite bows accurately while riding at full gallop. Their signature tactic was the feigned retreat, drawing enemy forces forward before wheeling and shooting while appearing to flee. This Parthian shot, firing backward from horseback, became legendary. The composite bow, used by Parthian archers, was a sophisticated weapon constructed from wood, horn, and sinew. It required years of training to master, but outranged Roman bows and could penetrate armor at considerable distances. This cavalry-centered military system reflected the Iranian steppes tradition, combined with wealth from Mesopotamian agriculture. Maintaining cataphracts and their horses was expensive, possible only with substantial resources. The Iranian plateau's pastoral economy provided horses and horsemen. Mesopotamia's agricultural wealth paid for armor and equipment. The combination gave Parthia military capabilities neither purely nomadic steppe peoples nor settled agricultural empires possessed alone. Against infantry-heavy armies like Rome's legions, Parthian mobility and archery provided decisive advantages in open terrain. Only in siege warfare and mountain fighting did Parthians face limitations, as infantry was needed for such operations. Mithridates died in 138 before the Common Era, after a reign of nearly 40 years. He had transformed Parthia from a small kingdom in northeastern Iran into an empire stretching from Central Asia to the Euphrates. More importantly, he had established the foundations of Parthian power, the revival of Persian imperial ideology, the federal administrative structure, the cavalry military system, and control of the trade routes connecting the Mediterranean world to Central Asia and China. His successors would build upon these foundations. For the next century, however, the Parthian Empire faced internal challenges and external threats that tested whether Mithridates' creation would endure. Succession disputes plagued Parthia after Mithridates I. The Arsacid dynasty never established clear rules of succession. Parthian kingship involved selection by clan councils of the great Iranian noble families, the so-called Parthian houses. Any Arsacid prince with sufficient support could claim the throne. This system, rooted in the tribal traditions of the Parthian homeland, created frequent civil wars. Phraates II, who succeeded Mithridates, faced immediate challenges. In 130, before the Common Era, the Seleucid king, Antiochus VII, mounted a final attempt to reclaim Mesopotamia. Antiochus, the last effective Seleucid monarch, assembled a large army and invaded Parthian territory. His initial campaign met success. Seleucid forces reoccupied Mesopotamian cities and advanced into Media. The Parthian Empire faced dismemberment only a decade after Mithridates had constructed it. Phraates employed scorched earth tactics, retreating before the Seleucid army and destroying supplies. The Seleucid force, advancing deep into winter quarters in Media, was scattered across multiple cities. In 129, before the Common Era, Phraates launched coordinated attacks against the dispersed Seleucid garrisons. Antiochus VII died in battle, and his army was destroyed. The catastrophe ended Seleucid power permanently. The empire fractured into rival claimants confined to Syria, never again threatening Parthian control of Mesopotamia or Iran. The destruction of Antiochus VII's army had strategic consequences beyond the immediate victory. It demonstrated conclusively that the Seleucid Empire could not recover its eastern provinces. The frontier between the Hellenistic West and the Iranian East was permanently established at the Euphrates River. Phraates had little time to enjoy victory. The Scythians, nomadic tribes from Central Asia, invaded the Parthian northeastern frontier in devastating force. These raids were part of larger migrations sweeping the Eurasian steppe. The Yuezhi, pushed westward by the Xiongnu Confederation in Mongolia, displaced the Scythians, who in turn invaded Parthian and Bactrian territories. Phraates marched east to confront the invasion. In 128 before the Common Era, he was killed fighting the Scythians. His successor, Artabanus, also died fighting nomadic invaders around 123 before the Common Era. The Parthian Empire faced existential crisis. Scythian tribes occupied Parthia's northeastern provinces. The Silk Road trade routes were severed. Royal authority collapsed as provincial governors and noble families pursued independent policies. Mithridates II, who became king around 123 before the Common Era, restored Parthian power through decades of patient campaigning. He first secured the Mesopotamian core, ensuring tax revenues continued flowing. Then he turned east. Through a combination of military campaigns and diplomatic arrangements, Mithridates defeated the Scythian invaders and re-established Parthian control over the northeastern frontier. By 115 before the Common Era, he had restored the empire's territorial integrity. More importantly, Mithridates too recognized that security against steppe nomads required defensive systems. He strengthened fortifications along the northeastern frontier and established client relationships with some tribal groups to serve as buffers against others. This approach, similar to Chinese policies along their northern frontier, would characterize Parthian steppe policy for centuries. With the frontier secure, Mithridates II turned attention westward. Armenia, the mountainous kingdom between Parthia and Rome's expanding eastern frontier, became a Parthian client state. In 115 before the Common Era, Mithridates installed a pro-Parthian king in Armenia, beginning Armenian subordination to Parthian interests that would continue with interruptions for over a century. Control of Armenia gave Parthia influence beyond the Euphrates and a buffer against Rome. It also brought Parthia into direct contact with the rising power of the Mediterranean world. In 96 before the Common Era, representatives of Mithridates II met with the Roman general Sulla at the Euphrates River. This first diplomatic contact between Parthia and Rome was fraught with symbolism. Sulla, representing the Roman Senate, met the Parthian envoys as equals. The Parthian representatives reportedly demanded precedence, asserting their king's superior status. Sulla refused. The incident, though minor, foreshadowed centuries of conflict rooted in competing claims to dominance. The meeting between Parthian and Roman envoys marked a historic moment. Two great powers now shared a frontier at the Euphrates. Both claimed to be heirs of universal empire. Rome styled itself the conqueror of the civilized world, heir to Alexander's achievements. Parthia claimed the legacy of the Persian Empire, the ancient dominion that had ruled from India to Egypt. Neither power recognized the other as equal, yet neither could immediately overwhelm the other. The Euphrates frontier, established in the 140s before the Common Era, would remain relatively stable for over 6 centuries, a rare example of a long-lasting border between great powers. This stability rested not on peace, but on balance. Parthia and Rome were roughly equal in resources and military capability. Rome's legions were formidable in infantry combat and siege warfare. Parthia's cavalry dominated open terrain. Neither side possessed decisive advantage. Mithridates II also secured the Silk Road trade routes that crossed Parthian territory. The Han dynasty in China, having defeated the Xiongnu and expanded into Central Asia, sent embassies westward, seeking allies and trading partners. In 92 before the Common Era, Parthian envoys reached the Han court. Direct contact established commercial relations that would make Parthia immensely wealthy. Chinese silk, transported along the Silk Road through Parthian territory, became wildly popular in the Roman Empire. Roman gold and silver flowed eastward to pay for silk and spices. Parthian merchants controlled the trade routes and collected transit taxes. The Parthian government maintained the caravanserais, protected merchant caravans, and mediated between Chinese suppliers and Roman customers. This role as middleman in east-west trade provided revenues exceeding even Mesopotamia's agricultural taxes. The Silk Road trade transformed Parthia from a territorial empire into a commercial empire. When Mithridates II died around 91 before the Common Era, he left an empire at its zenith. Territorially secure, diplomatically recognized, and economically prosperous, Parthia had achieved great power status. The revival of Iranian sovereignty over the former Persian Empire was complete, yet the very success contained vulnerabilities. The Parthian state was a federation of semi-autonomous satrapies held together by the prestige and military capability of the king. When strong kings ruled, the system functioned effectively. When succession disputes produced weak or contested monarchs, centrifugal forces threatened to tear the empire apart. The great noble families, descended from Parthian tribal chiefs, and the Iranian aristocracy of conquered territories, possessed independent military forces and governed their regions with minimal royal interference. They owed allegiance to the Arsacid dynasty in general, but not necessarily to any particular Arsacid king. The decades following Mithridates II exemplified these structural problems. Between 91 and 57 before the Common Era, Parthia experienced chronic political instability. Multiple claimants fought for the throne. Provincial governors ignored royal authority. The great noble families pursued independent policies. Armenia broke away from Parthian control. The Silk Road trade continued, but tax revenues declined as local magnates retained wealth. During this period of Parthian weakness, Rome expanded eastward. Pompey, the Great's campaigns in the 60s before the Common Era, reorganized the Roman East. In 66 before the Common Era, Pompey annexed Syria, ending even nominal Seleucid independence. The last remnant of Alexander's successors vanished. Rome now controlled the entire eastern Mediterranean, from Egypt to Asia Minor to Syria. More ominously for Parthia, Rome installed a client king in Armenia, replacing Parthian influence with Roman. The buffer state between the two empires became a contested zone. For the first time in history, two genuine superpowers faced each other across the Euphrates River. Neither Rome nor Parthia could claim absolute military superiority over the other, and neither was willing to concede the contested territories between them. Armenia became the perpetual flashpoint, a wealthy kingdom whose allegiance could tilt the balance of power in either direction. Control of Armenia meant control of the crucial trade routes connecting the Mediterranean world to Central Asia and China. Both empires understood that the coming confrontation would determine who would dominate Western Asia for centuries. The Romans under Phraates III attempted diplomatic engagement. In 57 before the Common Era, after eliminating rival claimants and restoring central authority, Phraates III sent envoys to Rome seeking formal recognition of Parthian sovereignty over Armenia and Mesopotamia. The Roman Senate, preoccupied with internal politics and the growing power of individual generals like Pompey and Julius Caesar, responded with calculated ambiguity. They neither accepted nor rejected Parthian claims, instead proposing that the Euphrates River serve as the boundary between spheres of influence. This diplomatic formula satisfied neither party. Parthia considered all territory east of the Roman Syrian provinces to be rightfully theirs, including Armenia. Rome viewed Armenia as a natural extension of its eastern frontier, necessary for protecting Syria and Asia Minor from invasion. In 54 before the Common Era, Marcus Licinius Crassus received the governorship of Syria. Crassus was one of Rome's wealthiest men, a member of the first triumvirate alongside Pompey and Caesar, and a politician desperate for military glory to match his colleagues' achievements. Caesar had conquered Gaul. Pompey had reorganized the East. Crassus had only suppressed the slave revolt of Spartacus, a victory against social inferiors rather than foreign enemies. Parthia represented an irresistible target. Intelligence reports described the Parthian Empire as weak and divided, its military inferior to Roman legions, its wealth vulnerable to plunder. Crassus believed a quick campaign would bring him triumph in Rome, immense wealth from looting Mesopotamian cities, and political prestige equal to his partners in the triumvirate. These assessments proved catastrophically wrong. Roman intelligence had confused Parthian political decentralization with military weakness. The Parthian military system differed fundamentally from Rome's heavy infantry model. Where Roman strength lay in disciplined legionaries fighting in close formation with short swords and large shields, Parthian power rested on mounted archers and heavily armored cavalry called cataphracts. The Parthian army was almost entirely cavalry, drawn from the Iranian aristocracy and their retainers. Parthian nobles trained from childhood in mounted archery, the traditional military skill of Iranian peoples, since their ancestors had migrated from the Central Asian steppes 1,500 years earlier. The composite bow, made from wood, horn, and sinew, could penetrate armor at considerable distances. Parthian tactics emphasized mobility and ranged firepower rather than close combat. Crassus invaded Parthia in 54 before the Common Era with 7 legions, approximately 40,000 infantry, 4,000 cavalry, and 4,000 light infantry. He crossed the Euphrates at Zeugma and advanced into Mesopotamia. The Parthian king Orodes II divided his forces. He personally led the main army north into Armenia to prevent the Armenian king Artavasdes II from supporting the Roman invasion. Orodes left his general Shurena with only 10,000 cavalry to delay the Roman advance. This apparent weakness was calculated strategy. Surena had no intention of confronting the legions directly. Instead, he shadowed the Roman column, waiting for the ideal battlefield. Crassus made a critical error in logistics. He chose to march directly across the Mesopotamian plain towards Seleucia rather than following the Euphrates River valley, where water and supplies were abundant. His Armenian allies had recommended the river route and offered to provide additional cavalry to screen the Roman advance. Crassus rejected this advice, partly from confidence in Roman military superiority and partly from suspicion that Artavasdes was deliberately trying to slow the campaign. The decision to cross open terrain played directly into Parthian strengths. In 53 before the Common Era, near the town of Carrhae, Surena positioned his forces to intercept the Roman army. The battlefield was flat, open terrain ideal for cavalry operations and terrible for infantry legions. Crassus arranged his forces in a hollow square formation, infantry on all sides, with cavalry and baggage in the center. This defensive formation minimized vulnerability to encirclement, but sacrificed mobility. As the Romans advanced, Surena's horse archers surrounded them at distance and began shooting. The Parthian composite bow had an effective range of approximately 200 meters. Roman javelins, the legion's primary ranged weapon, had maximum range of about 30 meters. The Romans could not close with the enemy to use their superior close combat skills, and they could not retreat without exposing their backs to enemy arrows. The massacre continued throughout the day. Parthian horse archers would approach the Roman formation, release volleys of arrows, then retreat before the legionaries could charge. Each Parthian archer carried 2 quivers, and when ammunition ran low, supply camels positioned behind the fighting line provided fresh arrows. This logistical system allowed sustained fire that gradually destroyed the Roman army. Crassus sent his son Publius with cavalry and some infantry to drive off the horse archers. Surena feigned retreat, drawing the Roman detachment away from the main formation. Once isolated, Surena deployed his cataphracts. These heavily armored cavalry, both rider and horse protected by scale armor, charged the separated Roman force with long lances called kontos. Publius Crassus and his entire detachment were annihilated. The Parthians returned to the main battlefield carrying Publius's head on a spear. The psychological impact broke Roman morale. As night fell, Crassus attempted to withdraw toward Carrhae. The retreat became a rout. Parthian cavalry pursued through the darkness, killing thousands. Crassus and his senior officers took refuge in Carrhae with the survivors, approximately 10,000 men from the original 40,000. Surena offered negotiations. When Crassus emerged from the city to meet Parthian representatives, a scuffle broke out and he was killed, though whether by accident or deliberate assassination remains disputed. The surviving Roman soldiers either died in subsequent fighting, were captured as slaves, or scattered across the Syrian desert. Fewer than 10,000 reached Roman territory. The Parthians captured the legionary standards, the sacred eagles that represented Roman military honor. These standards would remain in Parthian custody for 33 years, a constant reminder of Rome's humiliation. The Battle of Carrhae represented one of the worst military disasters in Roman history. An entire Roman army, led by one of the Republic's most powerful political figures, had been destroyed by an enemy Rome had dismissed as inferior. The psychological impact resonated throughout the Mediterranean world. Rome was not invincible. The legions could be defeated. The Parthian Empire possessed military capabilities equal to or exceeding Rome's in cavalry warfare. More importantly, the battle established the Euphrates as the effective boundary between Roman and Parthian power. Neither side could project force deep into the other's territory without risking catastrophic defeat. Surena himself did not long enjoy his victory. Orodes II, returning from his successful campaign in Armenia, viewed his general's prestige as a political threat. In 51 before the Common Era, Surena was executed on fabricated charges of treason. This exemplified the Parthian political system's fundamental weakness. Military success did not translate into permanent power or security. The great noble families constantly competed for royal favor, and the Arsacid kings constantly feared being overshadowed by successful subordinates. The same decentralized system that allowed Parthia to mobilize powerful armies made sustained strategic planning nearly impossible. The decades following Carrhae saw intermittent warfare between Rome and Parthia. In 40 before the Common Era, taking advantage of Roman civil wars following Julius Caesar's assassination, the Parthians invaded Syria under Pacorus I, son of Orodes II and Quintus Labienus, a renegade Roman general. They conquered Syria and advanced into Asia Minor, reaching as far as the Aegean coast. Jerusalem fell to Parthian forces. For a moment, it appeared the entire Roman East might collapse. However, Pacorus lacked the siege equipment and logistics to capture the major fortified cities, and local populations did not welcome Parthian rule enthusiastically enough to provide sustained support. In 39 before the Common Era, Roman counteroffensives under Publius Ventidius Bassus defeated Labienus at the Amanus Pass. The following year, at the Battle of Gindarus, Ventidius defeated and killed Pacorus. The Parthians withdrew across the Euphrates, and Roman control of Syria was restored. Mark Antony, ruling the Roman East as part of the Second Triumvirate, launched his own invasion of Parthia in 37 before the Common Era. Like Crassus before him, Antony believed Roman military superiority would guarantee victory. Antony commanded a massive force, 16 legions plus allied troops, totaling perhaps 100,000 men, the largest Roman army yet assembled for an eastern campaign. Rather than crossing directly into Mesopotamia, Antony invaded through Armenia, planning to approach Parthian territory from the north and avoid the open terrain where Crassus had perished. The invasion initially succeeded. Antony advanced deep into Media Atropatene, the northwestern province of the Parthian Empire, and laid siege to the regional capital Phraspa. The siege of Phraspa in 36 before the Common Era became Antony's disaster. Parthian forces under Phraates IV harassed Roman supply lines and isolated the besieging army from its logistical base. As autumn approached, Antony faced the prospect of spending winter in hostile territory without adequate supplies. He abandoned the siege and began a fighting retreat back to Roman territory. The withdrawal through Armenia in winter conditions, constantly harassed by Parthian cavalry, cost Antony approximately 1/3 of his army. Estimates suggest 20,000 to 35,000. Romans died, more from exposure, starvation, and disease than from direct combat. Antony reached Syria with his reputation ruined and his political position weakened. His defeat, combined with his relationship with Cleopatra and his rivalry with Octavian, contributed to his eventual downfall and suicide in 30 before the Common Era. The failed Roman invasions established a military stalemate. Rome possessed superior heavy infantry, siege capabilities, and logistical organization. Parthia possessed superior cavalry, intimate knowledge of the terrain, and the strategic depth to trade space for time while exhausting invading armies. Neither side could achieve decisive victory in the other's core territory. This military reality forced both empires toward diplomatic accommodation. In 20 before the Common Era, Augustus, the first Roman emperor, reached a diplomatic settlement with Phraates IV. The Parthians returned the legionary standards captured at Carrhae and agreed to recognize Roman influence in Armenia. Rome, in turn, recognized Parthian sovereignty over Mesopotamia and agreed not to attempt further conquests east of the Euphrates. Augustus presented this agreement as a great victory in Roman propaganda. Statues and coins depicted Parthians kneeling before Rome, returning the captured standards. In reality, the settlement represented mutual recognition of approximate equality. The Augustan Compromise established the framework for Parthian-Roman relations for the next 2 centuries. Armenia remained contested, with both empires installing rival client kings and occasionally intervening militarily to support their candidates. Neither side attempted another major invasion of the other's core territory. Small-scale border wars erupted periodically, usually over Armenian succession or disputes about minor frontier territories. These conflicts followed a predictable pattern. Roman armies would invade Mesopotamia, capture cities, including occasionally the Parthian capital Ctesiphon, declare victory, then withdraw when logistics became unsustainable or when crises elsewhere in the Roman Empire demanded attention. Parthian counterattacks would raid Roman territory, occasionally penetrating into Syria, but lacked the siege capabilities to capture major fortified cities permanently. In 58 of the Common Era, a new crisis emerged when Vologases I installed his brother Tiridates as king of Armenia without Roman consent. Emperor Nero sent the general Corbulo to restore Roman authority. The resulting war dragged on for 5 years, demonstrating both empires' capabilities and limitations. Corbulo conquered Armenia and installed a Roman client king. Parthian forces counterattacked and restored Tiridates. Eventually, both sides agreed to a compromise that revealed the underlying political reality. In 66 of the Common Era, Tiridates traveled to Rome and received his crown from Nero in an elaborate ceremony. He remained king of Armenia as a member of the Arsacid dynasty, but formally acknowledged Roman approval of his reign. Armenia would henceforth be ruled by a branch of the Parthian royal family, but within the Roman sphere of influence. This compromise endured for decades, creating a stable buffer state between the empires. The Parthian Empire, during the 1st and 2nd centuries of the Common Era, represented a genuine alternative civilization to the Roman Mediterranean world. While Rome built centralized bureaucratic administration with standardized law codes, professional armies, and urban culture based on Greek and Latin traditions, Parthia maintained a decentralized feudal system with multiple languages, diverse religious traditions, and cultural practices rooted in Iranian heritage. The Parthian Arsacid kings ruled not through direct administration but through networks of vassal kings, noble families, and autonomous city-states. This flexibility allowed remarkable cultural and religious diversity within the empire. Zoroastrianism remained the dominant religion of the Iranian aristocracy, though not enforced as a state religion. The Parthian period saw the compilation of surviving Zoroastrian texts, oral traditions preserved since the destruction of written records during Alexander's conquest 4 centuries earlier. Alongside Zoroastrianism, Greek religious practices persisted in Western cities founded during the Seleucid period. Judaism flourished in Mesopotamian cities, especially Babylon and Ctesiphon, where large Jewish populations had lived since the Babylonian captivity 6 centuries earlier. The Parthian Empire's religious tolerance attracted persecuted minorities from Roman territory. Early Christian communities spread eastward into Mesopotamia during the 1st and 2nd centuries, finding refuge from Roman persecution. This religious pluralism distinguished Parthia from Rome, where emperor worship and later Christianity created pressure toward religious uniformity. Economic prosperity derived from the Silk Road trade routes connecting China to the Mediterranean world. Parthian territory controlled the central section of this network, collecting taxes on east-west commerce. Chinese silk, Indian spices, Central Asian horses, and other luxury goods passed through Parthian cities, enriching merchants and the royal treasury. Cities like Ctesiphon, Ecbatana, and Merv became cosmopolitan trade centers where merchants from across Asia and the Mediterranean mingled. Parthian merchants served as intermediaries between Chinese and Roman traders who rarely met directly. This position generated enormous profits and gave Parthian rulers strong incentive to maintain stable relations with both Eastern and Western neighbors. However, the continuous warfare with Rome gradually weakened the Parthian state. The late 1st and 2nd centuries saw increasingly destructive Roman invasions. In 114 of the Common Era, Emperor Trajan launched the most ambitious Roman Eastern campaign yet attempted. With 16 legions and massive auxiliary forces, Trajan systematically conquered Armenia and Mesopotamia. His forces reached the Persian Gulf in 116, the only time Roman troops would penetrate so deeply into Parthian territory. Trajan captured Ctesiphon and declared the creation of new Roman provinces in Mesopotamia. For a moment, it appeared the Parthian Empire might collapse entirely. Widespread revolts against Roman occupation erupted throughout Mesopotamia. The Parthian aristocracy rallied around various Arsacid claimants to the throne and coordinated resistance. Jewish communities in Mesopotamia, Cyprus, and Cyrenaica simultaneously rebelled against Roman rule, requiring significant Roman military resources to suppress. Trajan died in 117 while attempting to maintain control of his conquests. His successor, Hadrian, immediately reversed course, evacuating Mesopotamia and restoring pre-war frontiers. The practical impossibility of holding Mesopotamia against determined resistance had become clear. However, the repeated invasions devastated cities and disrupted trade networks. Each Roman sack of Ctesiphon weakened the Parthian economy and royal prestige. The most destructive conflict occurred during the reign of Marcus Aurelius. In 161, Parthian forces invaded Armenia and Syria, overrunning Roman defenses. The co-emperor Lucius Verus led the counteroffensive. Between 163 and 166, Roman armies systematically destroyed major Mesopotamian cities, including Seleucia, which was burned completely, and again captured and sacked Ctesiphon. The difference this time was biological catastrophe. Roman troops returning from Mesopotamia carried a devastating plague, probably smallpox, that spread throughout the Roman Empire and beyond. The Antonine Plague killed millions across both empires between 165 and 180. The demographic and economic consequences severely weakened both Rome and Parthia. In Parthia specifically, the destruction of major cities combined with plague mortality undermined royal authority and strengthened centrifugal forces within the empire. The late 2nd century saw Parthian central authority fragment as regional powers filled the vacuum left by royal weakness. Septimius Severus exploited this vulnerability in 195, launching another invasion that captured Ctesiphon yet again and annexed northern Mesopotamia as Roman provinces. The pattern of Roman invasions followed by Parthian recovery continued, but each cycle left the empire weaker. Provincial governors gained increasing autonomy as the royal government proved unable to defend territories or extract tribute effectively. The vassal kingdom of Persis in southwestern Iran, nominally subject to Parthian overlordship, preserved older Iranian traditions and administrative practices that had evolved from Achaemenid times. The local Persian rulers styled themselves as guardians of ancient imperial heritage, maintaining Zoroastrian fire temples and claiming descent from the Achaemenids. This ideological positioning would prove consequential. In 208, Vologases VI became the last significant Parthian king during a period of civil war between rival claimants. His authority never extended beyond parts of Mesopotamia and western Iran. The Parthian governmental system, which had relied on semi-autonomous vassal kingdoms and noble families maintaining local power in exchange for tribute and military service, proved inadequate to resist both external Roman pressure and internal dissolution. Caracalla exploited these divisions in 216 with yet another invasion of Mesopotamia. After Caracalla's assassination, the Battle of Nisibis in 217 saw Parthian forces under Artabanus IV defeat the new emperor Macrinus, forcing a peace treaty and Roman indemnity payments. This proved the final military success of the Parthian state. Ardashir I ruled the vassal kingdom of Persis under Parthian suzerainty, governing from Istaka near the ruins of Persepolis. He belonged to a priestly family that controlled important Zoroastrian fire temples. Around 208, Ardashir began expanding his territory at the expense of neighboring vassal kingdoms, nominally still under Parthian authority, but effectively independent. He defeated local rulers in Fars province and extended control northward into Kerman. The Parthian king Artabanus IV, preoccupied with Roman threats and rival claimants, initially could not respond to this rebellion in the empire's heartland. Ardashir deliberately invoked Achaemenid symbolism, presenting his revolt not merely as another provincial uprising, but as restoration of legitimate Persian imperial rule. He commissioned rock reliefs in the Achaemenid style and claimed direct descent from the ancient Persian kings. This ideological framework attracted support from Iranian nobility, who had grown dissatisfied with Parthian rule, which many perceived as too influenced by Hellenistic culture and insufficiently protective of Iranian interests. By 220, Ardashir controlled much of southern and central Iran. Artabanus IV finally moved to confront this threat directly. The decisive confrontation occurred in 224 at the Battle of Hormozgan in Fars province. Artabanus IV died in the battle, killed either during the fighting or immediately afterward. The Parthian army collapsed. Ardashir proclaimed himself King of Kings, founding the Sasanian dynasty and establishing the Sasanian Persian Empire. Within 2 years, Ardashir had captured Ctesiphon and eliminated remaining Parthian claimants, though some Arsacid princes fled to Armenia, where their dynasty continued under Roman then Byzantine suzerainty. The Sasanian revolution represented more than dynastic change. Ardashir centralized administration, replacing the Parthian feudal system of semi-autonomous vassals with appointed provincial governors directly responsible to the king. He standardized the bureaucracy along lines descended from Achaemenid models, using Persian rather than Greek as the administrative language. Zoroastrianism became the state religion with royal patronage, creating an organized church hierarchy under the leadership of a chief priest, the Mobad. This religious institutionalization strengthened royal ideology and provided administrative infrastructure reaching into provinces. Ardashir expanded Sasanian territory eastward into Kushan lands and westward into Mesopotamia, threatening Roman possessions. His son, Shapur I, who became co-ruler in 240, continued aggressive expansion. Shapur I proved one of the most capable military commanders in Iranian history. In 240, he invaded Roman Mesopotamia, capturing the fortress cities of Nisibis and Karhe. The Romans, dealing with simultaneous Germanic invasions on the Danube frontier, could not immediately respond. Between 242 and 244, Shapur campaigned extensively in Syria and Anatolia, besieging Antioch. The Roman Emperor Gordian III led a counteroffensive that initially pushed Sasanian forces back, but ended with Gordian's death at the Battle of Misish in 244. The circumstances remained unclear, possibly killed in battle or murdered by his own Praetorian prefect Philip. Philip the Arab, who succeeded Gordian, immediately concluded a peace treaty highly favorable to Persia, paying a huge indemnity and ceding disputed territories in Mesopotamia and Armenia. Shapur used this breathing space to campaign eastward, conquering parts of northwestern India and subjugating Kushan territories in Afghanistan and Central Asia. The Sasanian Empire now stretched from the Mediterranean to the Indus River. In 253, Shapur renewed war with Rome, invading Syria. Between 253 and 260, Shapur conducted 3 major campaigns into Roman territory. In 256, he captured and sacked Antioch, the 3rd largest city in the Roman Empire. The Emperor Valerian assembled a large army to stop the Persian advance. In 260, at the Battle of Edessa in northern Mesopotamia, Shapur achieved an unprecedented victory. The details remain disputed, but the outcome was unambiguous. Valerian was captured alive along with much of his army. This represented the first time a Roman emperor had been captured by foreign enemies. Shapur kept Valerian as a prisoner for the remainder of his life. Roman sources claimed Valerian was humiliated and used as a footstool when Shapur mounted his horse, though Persian sources said nothing of this. What remained certain was the propaganda value. Shapur commemorated the victory in massive rock reliefs carved at Nakhshe Rostam and Bishapur, showing Valerian kneeling before the Persian king, while Gordian III lies dead beneath the horse's hooves. The inscription accompanying the relief listed cities captured and the massive booty taken. Following this victory, Shapur's forces raided throughout Anatolia, reaching as far as Cappadocia and capturing hundreds of thousands of prisoners who were resettled in Persia. The Roman Empire appeared on the verge of collapse, beset by simultaneous barbarian invasions, internal usurpers, economic crisis, and plague. The Sasanian triumph proved temporary. Odaenathus of Palmyra, a Roman client king in Syria, organized effective resistance. Between 262 and 267, Odaenathus defeated Persian forces in Mesopotamia and even besieged Ctesiphon twice, though he could not capture it. Shapur died in 270, succeeded by Hormizd I, who ruled briefly before Bahram. One took the throne in 273. The late 3rd century saw relative stabilization of the Roman-Persian frontier, with neither side capable of decisive victory. The Roman Empire, under Diocletian, underwent administrative reforms and military reorganization beginning in 284. Diocletian's tetrarchy system and creation of a more mobile field army, alongside frontier limitaniae troops, improved Roman defensive capabilities. The Sasanian Empire similarly developed sophisticated frontier defense systems, relying on fortified cities, garrison forces, and client Arab tribes to control the desert frontier. Both empires recognized that neither could conquer the other, given existing military technology and geographic constraints. The Mesopotamian frontier remained relatively stable for the next century, with wars occurring over disputed border territories in Armenia, which both empires sought to control as a buffer state and source of cavalry. In 296, conflict erupted when the Sasanian king Narseh invaded Armenia and Syria. The Roman Caesar Galerius initially suffered defeat, but returned with reinforcements in 298. At the Battle of Satala in Armenia, Galerius won a crushing victory, capturing Narseh's camp, treasury, and family. The subsequent Treaty of Nisibis in 299 forced Persia to cede 5 provinces in northern Mesopotamia to Rome and recognize Roman suzerainty over Armenia. This represented the most favorable treaty Rome had achieved with Persia since the settlement with Parthia under Augustus 3 centuries earlier. The provinces remained in Roman hands for the next 40 years. Shapur, too, became king in 309, allegedly crowned while still in his mother's womb, according to legend. Actually an infant when proclaimed king with power exercised by regents. Upon reaching maturity in 325, Shapur too embarked on eastern campaigns to suppress nomadic invasions and secure the Central Asian frontier. These campaigns, lasting through the 330s, stabilized the northeastern frontier and demonstrated the constant threat nomadic peoples posed to sedentary empires. Returning westward, Shapur II began a series of wars against Rome, aimed at recovering territories lost in 299 and establishing Persian dominance over Armenia. Between 337 and 350, Shapur besieged Roman Mesopotamian fortresses repeatedly. The fortress city of Nisibis endured 3 major sieges in 337, 346, and 350, successfully resisting each time. These sieges demonstrated the difficulty of capturing well-fortified positions even for armies with sophisticated siege technology. In 353, civil war erupted in the Roman Empire when the general Magnentius rebelled against Constantius II. Shapur exploited this distraction to capture Roman fortresses in Mesopotamia. The war continued intermittently through the 350s, with advantage shifting between sides. In 360, the Roman Emperor Constantius II prepared a major offensive, but died before launching it. His successor, Julian, called the apostate for abandoning Christianity, invaded Persia in 363 with a massive army, perhaps 60,000 men. Julian's strategy aimed to strike directly at Ctesiphon, capturing the Persian capital and forcing Shapur to accept terms. The Roman army advanced down the Euphrates, winning battles against Persian forces, but unable to bring Shapur's main army to decisive engagement. Julian besieged Ctesiphon but could not capture the heavily fortified city. Persian forces destroyed Roman supply ships on the Euphrates, cutting supply lines. Julian made the fateful decision to withdraw northward through hostile territory. During the retreat, Persian cavalry harassed the Roman column constantly. At the Battle of Samarra, Julian was mortally wounded by a spear. Roman sources debated whether the wound came from Persian or Roman hands, some suggesting Christian soldiers in his own army. Julian died within days. His successor Jovian immediately sought peace. The Treaty of 363 represented a major Persian victory. Rome ceded the 5 provinces gained in 299, including Nisibis and Singara, abandoned claims to Armenia, and agreed not to support the Armenian king Arsaces III. The loss of Nisibis particularly shocked Romans, as the city had successfully resisted every Persian siege. Shapur's persistence had achieved what direct assault could not. The treaty established a frontier that remained essentially stable for the next 2 centuries. Shapur II died in 379 after a reign of 70 years, one of the longest in ancient history. His successors maintained the centralized administrative system and religious policies he had strengthened. The 4th and 5th centuries saw the Sasanian Empire reach its cultural apex. The capital Ctesiphon became one of the world's largest cities, with perhaps 500,000 inhabitants. The royal palace featured the Great Arch of Ctesiphon, a vaulted hall spanning 83 feet without internal supports, demonstrating advanced architectural engineering. Zoroastrianism flourished under state patronage with fire temples throughout the empire. The priesthood developed extensive religious literature in Middle Persian, codifying sacred texts and theological interpretations. Royal inscriptions and religious texts used a script descended from Aramaic. Persian literature preserved in later Arabic translations indicated a rich tradition of epic poetry, wisdom literature, and historical chronicles. The Sasanian period preserved and transmitted cultural material that would later inform Islamic Persian literature. The empire maintained extensive trade networks connecting the Mediterranean world, Central Asia, India, and through intermediaries China. Silk Road commerce enriched Persian merchants and royal treasuries through customs duties. Persian metalwork, textiles, and glass became luxury goods traded throughout the ancient world. Silver plates with royal hunting scenes demonstrated sophisticated metallurgical techniques and artistic styles. Sasanian artistic motifs influenced Byzantine, Central Asian, and eventually Islamic art. Religious diversity characterized Sasanian society despite Zoroastrianism's official status. Large Christian communities existed throughout Mesopotamia and western Iran. Jewish communities thrived, particularly in Mesopotamia, with rabbinic academies at Sura and Pumbedita, producing the Babylonian Talmud between the 3rd and 6th centuries. Manichaeism, founded by Mani in the 3rd century, spread widely before being suppressed. Mani himself enjoyed initial protection from Shapur I, but was executed under Bahram I in 276. Nestorian Christianity, deemed heretical by Byzantine churches, found refuge in Persia, where it established an independent ecclesiastical structure. The Sasanian government generally tolerated religious minorities, provided they paid taxes and did not proselytize among Zoroastrians. Periodic persecutions occurred when religious authorities perceived threats to Zoroastrian orthodoxy, or when Christians were suspected of loyalty to Christian Rome. The 5th century brought new nomadic invasions from Central Asia. The Hephthalites, a confederation of nomadic tribes, invaded eastern Iran and occupied territories in Bactria and Khorasan. Between 420 and 480, Sasanian kings fought repeatedly to contain Hephthalite raids. King Perozai launched a major campaign against the Hephthalites in 484, but was defeated and killed. The disaster resulted in loss of territory and payment of tribute to the Hephthalites for several decades. This eastern threat diverted resources and attention from the Roman frontier. Kavad I became king in 488, but was deposed by nobility in 496 and imprisoned. He escaped to the Hephthalites, who provided military support. In 498, Kavad returned with a Hepthalite army and regained his throne. This dependence on nomadic allies weakened royal prestige and created tension with the nobility and priesthood. Kavad I proved a reforming monarch who challenged established interests. He supported the Mazdakite movement, a religious and social reform ideology advocating redistribution of wealth and resources. Mazdak, the movement's leader, gained significant following among common people and some nobility. His teachings threatened the wealth and privileges of the traditional aristocracy and Zoroastrian priesthood. Whether Kavad genuinely supported Mazdakite ideology or used the movement to weaken aristocratic opposition remained debated. The movement created social upheaval and political crisis. In 528, Kavad's son Khosrow moved against the Mazdakites, massacring Mazdak and thousands of followers with support from the nobility and clergy. Khosrow I succeeded his father in 531 and ruled until 579, becoming known as Anushirvan the Just. His reign represented the height of Sasanian power and administrative sophistication. Khosrow reformed taxation, moving from a variable tribute system to fixed land taxes based on comprehensive cadastral surveys. This created predictable revenue and reduced corruption. He reorganized the army, creating 4 regional commands and developing elite cavalry units. Administrative reforms improved bureaucratic efficiency and reduced aristocratic autonomy. These reforms strengthened central authority and increased state capacity. Khosrow patronized scholarship and translation, establishing an academy at Gundashapur where Greek, Indian, and Persian knowledge traditions merged. Physicians, mathematicians, astronomers, and philosophers gathered under royal sponsorship. The academy translated works from Greek and Sanskrit, preserving classical knowledge that might otherwise have been lost. Medical advances included the first teaching hospital and systematic clinical instruction. Philosophical works from Athens found refuge after Justinian closed the Neoplatonic Academy in 529, and several philosophers took shelter at the Sasanian court. Khosrow's military campaigns expanded territorial control and enhanced prestige. He launched wars against the Byzantine Empire, capturing Antioch in 540 and deporting its population to build a new city near Ctesiphon. The wealth extracted from Byzantine territory funded building projects and administrative reforms. In the east, he defeated Hepthalite invaders in alliance with Turkic tribes, securing the northeastern frontier. His treaty with Byzantium in 562 established a temporary peace, but required Byzantine tribute payments. Khosrow's administrative and military reforms created a template for governance that influenced subsequent empires. His legal code systematized Zoroastrian law and established consistent judicial procedures. The efficiency of his government allowed rapid mobilization of resources and effective territorial control. His 48-year reign provided stability that enabled economic prosperity and cultural flourishing. Persian became the administrative and literary language across a vast territory, establishing linguistic patterns that persisted for centuries. Hormizd IV succeeded Khosrow in 579, but proved less capable. His attempts to continue his father's reformist policies without the same political skill alienated both aristocracy and army. In 590, a military coup deposed him in favor of his son Khosrow II. The new Shah faced immediate rebellion from the general Bahram Chobin, who briefly seized the throne. Khosrow II fled to Byzantine territory, seeking assistance from Emperor Maurice. This marked a dramatic shift in relations between the two empires. Maurice provided military support to restore Khosrow II in 591 in exchange for territorial concessions, including Armenia and eastern Mesopotamia. The Byzantine assistance demonstrated Khosrow II's dependence but also his diplomatic flexibility. Once restored, Khosrow II proved an ambitious and aggressive ruler. When Emperor Maurice was murdered by Phocas in 602, Khosrow used this as justification for renewed war, claiming to avenge his benefactor. The war that followed proved catastrophic for Byzantium but ultimately disastrous for both empires. Sasanian armies achieved stunning victories from 604 to 621. They conquered Syria, capturing Damascus in 613 and Antioch in 611. Jerusalem fell in 614, and the True Cross was taken to Ctesiphon as war booty. Egypt, the richest Byzantine province, fell between 619 and 621, depriving Constantinople of its grain supply. Sasanian forces reached Chalcedon across from Constantinople in 615, the closest Persia ever came to capturing the Byzantine capital. Anatolia suffered devastating raids. The Sasanian Empire controlled more territory than at any time since Shapur II, extending from Egypt through the Levant and Mesopotamia to Central Asia. Khosrow II ruled over perhaps a quarter of the world's population. Persian armies stood on 3 continents, and the ancient dream of Achaemenid restoration seemed realized. The wealth of Egypt and Syria flowed to Ctesiphon. The empire appeared invincible. However, this apparent triumph concealed fatal weaknesses. The massive military campaigns drained the treasury and exhausted manpower. Extended supply lines stretched administrative capacity. The occupied territories remained hostile and required garrison forces. In 622, Byzantine Emperor Heraclius launched a counteroffensive. Rather than attacking the occupied provinces directly, he invaded the Sasanian heartland through Armenia and Azerbaijan. This strategic innovation caught Persian forces off balance. Heraclius defeated several Persian armies between 623 and 627, penetrating deep into Iranian territory. He destroyed the great Zoroastrian fire temple at Takht-e-Solomon in 624, a psychological blow to Persian morale. Khosrow II proved unable to coordinate an effective defense. His generals fought independently without central coordination. Internal dissension weakened command structure. In 627, Heraclius defeated a Persian army near Nineveh in northern Mesopotamia. He then advanced towards Ctesiphon. Persian forces withdrew from occupied Byzantine territories to defend the capital. In 628, Persian nobles overthrew and executed Khosrow II, placing his son Kavad II on the throne. The new Shah immediately sued for peace, returning all conquered territories and the True Cross. Kavad II died after only months on the throne, possibly of plague. A succession crisis followed with multiple claimants fighting for power. Between 628 and 632, 8 different rulers claimed the throne, several reigning simultaneously in different regions. The administrative system collapsed. Provincial governors declared independence. The army fragmented into competing factions. The treasury was empty after decades of warfare. Plague had devastated the population of major cities. The social fabric deteriorated as central authority disappeared. In 632, Yazdegerd III, a grandson of Khosrow II, was placed on the throne as a child. He inherited an empire in terminal decline with no resources to restore order. The nobility could not agree on reforms. Regional commanders ignored central directives. The taxation system had broken down, leaving no revenue for the government. The empire that had appeared invincible a decade earlier now teetered on collapse. At precisely this moment of maximum vulnerability, a new threat emerged from Arabia. Muhammad ibn Abdullah had unified the Arabian Peninsula under Islam before his death in 632. Under his successors, the Rashidun Caliphs, Arab Muslim armies burst out of the desert with unexpected force. Abu Bakr, the first caliph, launched raids into Byzantine Syria and Sasanian Mesopotamia in 632 and 633. These initial probes encountered weakened defenses. The Byzantine Empire was exhausted from its war with Persia and had not yet restored administration in recovered provinces. The Sasanian Empire was fragmenting. Arab forces achieved easy victories that encouraged larger expeditions. In 633, Muslim commander Khalid ibn al-Walid defeated a Persian force at the Battle of Chains in Lower Mesopotamia. This opened Iraq to invasion. In 634, the Battle of the Bridge resulted in Arab defeat, but Persian victory was not followed up due to internal disorganization. At the Battle of Buwaib in 635, Arabs defeated another Persian army. These engagements revealed Persian weakness. The professional Sasanian military, once the most feared in the world, could not coordinate effectively. Soldiers were poorly paid and supplied. Command was divided among competing nobles. Morale was low after years of defeat and chaos. The decisive encounter came at the Battle of Qadisiyah in 636. Arab forces under Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas faced a much larger Persian army, commanded by Rostam Farrukhzad, one of the empire's most capable generals. The battle lasted 3 days. Persian elephants initially caused panic among Arab cavalry, but the Muslims rallied and defeated the Persian center. Rostam was killed, and the Persian army collapsed. This single battle opened all of Mesopotamia to Arab conquest. The Persian heartland lay exposed. Ctesiphon fell in 637 without significant resistance. The Arab armies captured the imperial treasury, including the legendary spring of Khosrow carpet and massive quantities of gold and silver. This wealth funded further expansion and demonstrated to Arab tribesmen the incredible profits available from conquest. Yazdegerd III fled east, attempting to rally resistance from the Iranian plateau. In 642, Arab and Persian armies met at the Battle of Nahavand in western Iran. The Persian army was decisively defeated, with losses so severe that Arab historians called it the victory of victories. This battle ended organized Persian resistance. Yazdegerd III continued fleeing east, reaching Balkh in Bactria and then Merv in 651. There, he was murdered by a local governor. The Sasanian Empire ended not with a dramatic last stand, but with an exiled Shah killed ignominiously for his remaining possessions. Arab Muslim armies conquered the Iranian plateau rapidly between 642 and 651. The Sasanian administrative structure collapsed before them. Local nobles often surrendered without fighting, accepting terms that preserved their properties in exchange for tribute. Cities capitulated rather than face siege. The population, exhausted by decades of instability, offered little resistance. The Arab conquest of Iran proved remarkably swift, considering the empire's size and population. This reflected not Arab military superiority, though their armies were effective, but the complete collapse of Sasanian state capacity. The empire had destroyed itself through overextension and civil war before the Arabs arrived. The conquest did not immediately transform Iranian society. Arab administrators maintained many Sasanian governmental practices. Zoroastrian nobility retained local authority under Muslim overlordship. The Persian bureaucratic class continued managing administration, now serving Arab governors. Tax collection systems remained largely unchanged. The Dihkans, the landed aristocracy, kept their estates. Most Persians remained Zoroastrian for decades after conquest. Islam spread gradually, often encouraged by tax advantages for converts. Urban populations converted faster than rural areas. The process took centuries, not decades. However, the Arab conquest transferred political power from Iranian to Arab hands. The Caliphate ruled from Medina, then Damascus, then Baghdad. Persian culture survived, but Persian political independence ended. The Iranian plateau became provinces of a larger Islamic empire, rather than the center of its own imperial system. Iranian military and administrative expertise contributed to the caliphate, but Persians served Arab rulers rather than commanding their own destinies. This represented a complete reversal from the Sasanian period when Persia had been a superpower, rivaling Rome and Byzantium. The speed and completeness of collapse remained remarkable. An empire that controlled vast territories in 620 could not field effective armies 20 years later. This reflected fundamental weaknesses in Sasanian political structure. The empire depended on continuous military success to maintain revenue and legitimacy. When military fortunes reversed, the entire system unraveled. The nobility's local power bases allowed them to survive the empire's fall by transferring allegiance to new rulers. They lacked commitment to imperial survival. The Zoroastrian priesthood could not mobilize resistance, comparable to what the Christian Church sometimes provided in occupied territories. The empire had relied on administrative efficiency and military might rather than popular loyalty. When both failed, nothing remained. The Islamic conquest transformed the Middle East permanently. Arab language and Islamic religion spread across territory that had been Persian for over a millennium. Persian culture did not disappear but adapted to new circumstances. The Iranian contribution to Islamic civilization proved enormous. Persian administrative techniques shaped caliphal governance. Persian scholarship influenced Islamic science and philosophy. Persian literary traditions merged with Arabic to create new cultural forms. Persian architectural styles influenced mosque design. Yet politically, Iran became part of a larger Islamic world rather than an independent power center. This persisted for over 2 centuries. Only in 821 did a Persian Muslim dynasty, the Tahirids, establish semi-independent rule in Khorasan, while nominally acknowledging caliphal authority. The Saffarids and Samanids followed, gradually reasserting Persian political identity within Islamic frameworks. Full independence did not return until the Safavid dynasty in 1601, nearly a millennium after the Sasanian collapse. The question of what might have altered this trajectory requires examining the pivotal moments. The overextension of Khosrow II proved fatal. Had he consolidated gains rather than pursuing total Byzantine destruction, resources might have remained for meeting the Arab threat. The succession crisis after his fall was not inevitable. Had Kavad II survived or a capable adult taken the throne, administrative restoration might have occurred. The fragmentation between 628 and 632 resulted from specific political failures by the nobility, who prioritized their own power struggles over imperial survival. A unified response to Arab raids in 632 and 633 might have checked expansion before momentum built. Stronger leadership at Qadisiyah could have turned the battle. These were contingent events, not predetermined outcomes. Yet the structural weaknesses were real. The Sasanian system had exhausted itself through constant warfare with Byzantium. Both empires were vulnerable to outside attack by the late 620s. Byzantium survived because it had strategic depth in Anatolia and could retreat behind Constantinople's formidable defenses. The Sasanian capital was more exposed, and the empire lacked natural defensive barriers once Mesopotamia fell. The empire's end reflected both bad decisions and structural vulnerabilities. Had the Sasanian Empire survived the 7th century crisis, the world would have developed very differently. A continued Persian superpower would have blocked Arab expansion, confining Islam to Arabia or limiting its spread. This would have prevented the Islamic Golden Age that preserved and advanced classical knowledge. The cultural synthesis of Persian, Arab, and Greek traditions would not have occurred as it did. European history would have differed fundamentally, as the Islamic world that preserved classical texts during Europe's early medieval period would not have existed in the same form. The Crusades would never have happened. The Ottoman Empire would not have arisen. The entire trajectory of Eurasian history depended on the Sasanian collapse and the Islamic expansion that followed. That collapse was not inevitable, but resulted from specific failures, compounding structural weaknesses at a moment of extreme vulnerability. The Sasanian collapse demonstrated how Persian power, despite deep historical roots and sophisticated statecraft, could be undone by simultaneous external pressure and internal exhaustion. Yet the rapidity of Arab conquest between 636 and 651 also revealed something else. The administrative systems and cultural frameworks Persia had developed over centuries possessed remarkable durability. The Arabs who conquered Iran found themselves unable to simply impose their own structures on such an ancient civilization. Instead, they adopted Persian administrative practices, employed Persian bureaucrats, and gradually absorbed Persian cultural elements into Islamic civilization. The very word divan, for government bureau, came from Persian. The postal system the Caliphate used descended directly from Sasanian models. Even Islamic theology developed significantly through engagement with Persian converts, who brought Zoroastrian concepts of cosmic dualism, apocalypticism, and eschatology into the new religion. This cultural resilience under conquest proved more enduring than military power. The Islamic conquest replaced Persian political independence with Arab rule, but it could not erase Persian identity. Under the Umayyad Caliphate, from 661 to 750, Persians occupied subordinate positions despite converting to Islam in increasing numbers. The Arab military aristocracy monopolized power and wealth, treating Persian converts as second-class Muslims who still owed the jizya poll tax theoretically reserved for non-Muslims. This discrimination violated Islamic principles of equality among believers and created deep resentment among Persian Muslims who had abandoned their ancestral religion but received no corresponding benefits. The Umayyad system privileged Arab ethnicity over Islamic piety, directly contradicting the religion's universal message. Persian Muslims found natural allies in other non-Arab Muslims and in Arabs who opposed Umayyad rule. This coalition would eventually destroy the Umayyad dynasty and reshape Islamic civilization. The Abbasid revolution that began in 747 originated in Khorasan in northeastern Iran. Abu Muslim, the revolution's military leader, was likely of Persian origin, though sources disagree. He mobilized Persian Muslims and others dissatisfied with Umayyad rule under the banner of restoring true Islamic governance through the Abbasid family, descendants of Muhammad's uncle. The revolutionaries promised equal treatment for all Muslims, regardless of ethnicity. The revolution succeeded in 750, when Abbasid forces defeated the last Umayyad Caliph. The new Abbasid Caliphate immediately implemented policies favorable to non-Arab Muslims. Persian converts gained equal status with Arabs. Persian administrators filled high government positions. The capital moved from Damascus to Baghdad in 762, placing the Caliphate's center of gravity in former Persian territory. The Abbasid state adopted Persian court ceremonies, administrative structures, and political theory. The Caliph's chief minister bore the Persian title vizier from the Middle Persian vichir. Persian families dominated the bureaucracy for generations. The early Abbasid period from 750 to 900 witnessed the Islamic Golden Age, but the intellectual flowering drew heavily on Persian contributions. The House of Wisdom, established in Baghdad under Caliph al-Ma'mun in 830, became the era's preeminent center of learning, but it functioned according to Sasanian models of royal patronage for scholarship. The translation movement that brought Greek, Persian, and Sanskrit texts into Arabic employed Persian scholars alongside Arabs and Christians. Families like the Barmakids, Persians who served as viziers, patronized scientific and literary work. Persian physicians like Rhazes and Ibn Sina revolutionized medicine by synthesizing Greek, Indian, and Persian medical traditions. Persian mathematicians like al-Khwarizmi developed algebra, drawing on both Greek and Indian sources. Persian astronomers built on Sasanian astronomical tables. The synthesis that created Islamic civilization was genuinely multicultural, but Persian contributions were fundamental, and Persian administrative structures provided the framework. Despite cultural influence, Persians lacked political independence. The Abbasid caliphs were Arab, the official language was Arabic, and the dynasty's legitimacy derived from descent from the Prophet Muhammad rather than Persian imperial traditions. Persian identity survived in language and literature. New Persian emerged in the 8th and 9th centuries as a literary language distinct from Middle Persian, written in Arabic script but retaining Persian vocabulary and grammar. The Samanid dynasty, ruling Transoxiana and Khorasan from 819 to 999, patronized Persian literature, sponsoring Ferdowsi's composition of the Shahnameh, the Persian national epic completed around 1010. The Shahnameh preserved pre-Islamic Iranian history and mythology. celebrating ancient Persian heroes and kings. It became the foundational text of Persian cultural identity, asserting continuity with the Achaemenid and Sasanian empires despite Islamic conquest. The poem's composition demonstrated that Persian identity had not died, but merely entered a period of political subordination. The Abbasid Caliphate's fragmentation after 900 allowed Persian political revival. Regional dynasties emerged as the caliphs became figureheads. The Samanids in the east, the Buyids, who controlled Baghdad itself from 945 to 1055, and other Persian dynasties, reasserted Iranian power within the Islamic framework. The Buyids were particularly significant because they physically controlled the caliphs while maintaining the fiction of caliphal authority. They bore Persian titles like Shahanshah and revived Persian courtly traditions while nominally serving the Arab caliph. This arrangement prefigured later Islamic political structures where symbolic Arab religious authority coexisted with Turkish or Persian military and political power. The Ghaznavid dynasty succeeded the Samanids in the east, ruling from 977 to 1186 from their capital at Ghazni in modern Afghanistan. The Ghaznavids sponsored Persian culture, despite their Turkish military origins patronizing poets like Ferdowsi. The pattern repeated itself: Turkish military power combined with Persian administrative skill and culture. The Seljuk Turks, who built an empire from 1037 to 1194, followed the same model. Originating as steppe nomads, the Seljuks converted to Islam and conquered Iran, Mesopotamia, and Anatolia. They defeated the Buyids and became the caliph's protectors in Baghdad. Yet the Seljuk sultans employed Persian viziers, used Persian bureaucratic systems, and patronized Persian culture. The most famous Seljuk vizier, Nizam al-Mulk, was Persian and wrote his political treatise, the Siyasatnama, in Persian, drawing on ancient Iranian political philosophy. The Seljuk period saw Persian administrative practices spread across the Middle East. Persian became the language of culture and administration from Anatolia to India. The pattern established under the Abbasids thus continued. Turkish military power provided political control. Arab language retained religious primacy. But Persian culture and administration supplied the civilizational framework. The Mongol invasions, beginning in 1219, devastated Iran more thoroughly than the Arab conquest had. Genghis Khan's armies destroyed cities throughout Khorasan and northern Iran. The Mongol conquest of Baghdad in 1258 ended the Abbasid Caliphate entirely, killing the last caliph. The destruction was systematic and terrifying. Mongol forces massacred urban populations, destroyed irrigation systems, and reduced flourishing regions to wasteland. The death toll in Iran may have reached several million. The demographic collapse depopulated entire regions. The invasion represented perhaps the greatest catastrophe in Iranian history, worse than any previous conquest. Yet even this overwhelming military disaster could not erase Persian civilization. The Mongol Ilkhanate that ruled Iran from 1256 to 1335 gradually converted to Islam and adopted Persian administrative practices. Mongol Khans employed Persian viziers just as the Seljuks had. The Ilkhanate's court patronized Persian literature and art. Persian historians like Rashid al-Din served the Mongol rulers and recorded their history. Within 2 generations of conquering Iran, the Mongols had been culturally absorbed. The Timurid Empire, founded by Timur from 1370 to 1455, continued this pattern. Timur was ethnically Turco-Mongol, claimed descent from Genghis Khan, and led nomadic armies to conquest across Central Asia, Iran, and northern India. His campaigns were as destructive as the Mongol invasions, with systematic massacres and pyramid of skulls. Yet Timur patronized Persian culture, and his successors made Persian the language of their sophisticated court. The Timurid capital at Herat in western Afghanistan became a center of Persian literature and art. The Timurid period produced some of Persian literature's greatest poets, including Jami. Timurid painting developed the Persian miniature tradition to new heights. Timurid architecture blended Mongol and Persian elements. The Timurid court employed the finest Persian craftsmen, scholars, and artists. This represented the culmination of a pattern visible since the Arab conquest. Military conquerors from outside Iran initially destroyed, but then adopted Persian civilization, finding it more sophisticated than their own traditions and better suited to governing sedentary populations. The Safavid Empire, founded in 1501, finally restored genuine Persian independence after nearly 900 years of foreign rule. Shah Ismail I, founder of the Safavid dynasty, descended from a Sufi religious order based in Ardabil in northwestern Iran. The Safavids mobilized Turkmen tribal warriors called Kizilbash but claimed Persian imperial heritage and sought to revive Iranian glory. Most significantly, Ismail made Twelver Shia Islam the state religion. This decision fundamentally distinguished Iran from its Sunni neighbors and created the religious identity modern Iran maintains. The choice was partly pragmatic, differentiating Iran from the Sunni Ottoman Empire to the west and the Sunni Uzbeks to the east. But it also connected to Persian political traditions, as Shia Islam's emphasis on rightful leadership and hidden imams resonated with Persian concepts of legitimate kingship. The Safavids presented themselves as successors to ancient Persian emperors, reviving the title Shahanshah. They consciously imitated Achaemenid and Sasanian models, using Persepolis for ceremonies. The Safavid period witnessed a cultural renaissance, as Persian identity combined with Shia religious identity to create a distinctive Iranian civilization. The Safavid Empire, at its height under Shah Abbas I, who ruled from 1588 to 1629, demonstrated that Persian power could again be formidable. Abbas reformed the military, creating infantry units armed with muskets and a corps of slave soldiers loyal to the Shah rather than tribal leaders. This reduced dependence on unreliable Kizilbash cavalry. Abbas moved the capital to Isfahan and transformed it into one of the world's great cities, with magnificent mosques, palaces, and public spaces. The motto, Isfahan is half the world, reflected contemporary pride in the city's beauty and sophistication. Safavid Iran traded with European powers, selling silk and competing with the Ottomans for regional dominance. Abbas temporarily reconquered territories in the Caucasus and Mesopotamia, though Ottoman and later Russian pressure would reverse these gains. The Safavid period proved that Iran could be a major power even in the gunpowder age, though it faced increasingly difficult competition from better organized neighbors. The Safavid collapse in 1722 resulted partly from Afghan invasions, but more fundamentally from internal weaknesses. The later Safavid Shahs lacked Abbas's ability and energy. The military reforms were not sustained. Religious persecution of Sunni minorities in border regions alienated populations and provided pretexts for intervention. When Afghan rebels captured Isfahan in 1722 and ended Safavid rule, Iran fragmented into competing regions. The Afsharid dynasty under Nader Shah, who ruled from 1736 to 1747, briefly restored Iranian military power. Nader conquered Delhi in 1739, looting the Mughal Empire's treasures, including the Peacock Throne and Koh-i-Noor diamond. This demonstrated that Iranian military capability could still achieve spectacular results. But Nader's empire was personal, held together by his military genius, and it collapsed immediately after his assassination. The subsequent Zand dynasty, from 1751 to 1794, ruled only part of Iran and could not restore unified power. The Qajar dynasty that ruled Iran from 1789 to 1925 faced even greater challenges than previous Persian empires. The Qajars reunified Iran after decades of fragmentation, and Aga Muhammad Khan, who founded the dynasty, brutally suppressed rivals and established Tehran as the new capital in 1796. But the Qajar period coincided with European imperial expansion and the Industrial Revolution, which created an unprecedented power imbalance between Europe and Asia. Russia expanded into the Caucasus, directly threatening northern Iran. Britain controlled India and treated southern Iran as a sphere of influence. the Qajars lacked resources to resist effectively. The Treaty of Gulistan in 1813 ceded Georgia, Dagestan, and other Caucasian territories to Russia. The Treaty of Turkmenchay in 1828 ceded more Caucasian territory and granted Russia extraterritorial rights, meaning Russian subjects in Iran were not subject to Iranian law. This was humiliating and reduced Iranian sovereignty. Britain extracted similar concessions in the south. Qajar Iran became a buffer state between British and Russian empires, losing territory and autonomy throughout the 19th century. The erosion of Iranian sovereignty accelerated in the late 19th century as European powers extracted economic concessions that transferred control of Iranian resources to foreign companies. In 1872, Baron Julius de Ruyter, a British subject, obtained a sweeping concession from Nasser al-Din Shah that granted him monopoly rights over railways, tramways, roads, telegraph lines, factories, mills, mineral extraction, irrigation works, and banking throughout Iran for 70 years. Lord Curzon called it the most complete and extraordinary surrender of the entire industrial resources of a kingdom into foreign hands that has ever been dreamed of. The concession provoked such outrage among Iranian merchants, clerics, and officials that the Shah was forced to cancel it in 1873, though he paid Reuter substantial compensation. The episode demonstrated both the willingness of Qajar rulers to sell Iranian assets to foreigners and the existence of domestic opposition that could sometimes block such arrangements. The tobacco protest of 1891 to 1892 revealed growing public resistance to foreign economic domination. In 1890, the Shah granted a British subject named Major Gerald Talbot a 50-year monopoly over the production, sale, and export of all tobacco in Iran. Tobacco was widely cultivated and consumed, making this concession highly intrusive in daily Iranian life. Opposition emerged from multiple sources. Merchants resented competition from the foreign monopoly. Tobacco cultivators feared losing income. Religious leaders opposed foreign control of an important commodity. Jamal al-Din al-Afghani, an influential political activist, wrote from exile urging resistance. The senior Shia cleric, Mirza Hassan Shirazi, issued a fatwa declaring tobacco use forbidden as long as the concession remained in effect. This religious ruling had extraordinary impact. Iranians across the country stopped smoking tobacco, even in the Shah's palace. The tobacco boycott paralyzed the concession and threatened public order. In 1892, the Shah cancelled the concession, but again paid substantial compensation to the British company, borrowing money from a Russian bank to do so. The tobacco protest was significant because it demonstrated that religious authorities, merchants, and ordinary Iranians could coordinate effective resistance to policies they opposed. It established patterns of protest that would recur in the constitutional revolution and later movements. Qajar, Iran's fiscal weakness, increased dependence on foreign loans. The government spent lavishly on royal expenses while lacking effective tax collection. Multiple trips by Qajar Shahs to Europe in the late 19th century cost enormous sums and were financed by loans from Russian and British banks. These loans came with conditions that gave foreign powers leverage over Iranian finances and policy. By the early 20th century, Iran's economy was largely controlled by Russia in the north and Britain in the south. Russian banks, military advisors, and merchants dominated the northern provinces. The Imperial Bank of Persia, a British institution founded in 1889, controlled currency issuance and major financial operations. Foreign companies owned most modern infrastructure. This semi-colonial status generated widespread resentment among Iranians, who saw their country being carved up by foreign powers, while the Qajar government seemed incapable or unwilling to resist. The constitutional revolution of 1905 to 1911 attempted to limit royal power and establish representative government. Multiple factors drove this movement. Merchants and artisans suffered from foreign economic competition and arbitrary taxation. Intellectuals exposed to European ideas advocated constitutional limits on monarchy. Religious scholars objected to foreign influence and governmental incompetence. The revolution began in December 1905 when merchants and clerics took sanctuary in mosques in Tehran to protest the punishment of merchants accused of price manipulation. The protests grew. In January 1906, thousands of protesters took refuge in the British legation, demanding dismissal of unpopular officials and establishment of a House of Justice. Mozaffar al-Din Shah, weakened by illness, agreed in August 1906 to allow establishment of a National Consultative Assembly or Majlis. Elections occurred in autumn 1906. The first Majlis convened in October 1906 and drafted a constitution that was signed by the dying Shah in December 1906. The constitution established a parliament elected by limited suffrage, required Majlis approval for loans and concessions, and guaranteed certain civil rights. Supplementary constitutional laws approved in 1907 further limited royal power and established a Bill of Rights. The constitutional system faced immediate challenges. Muhammad Ali Shah, who succeeded his father in January 1907, opposed constitutional limits on his authority. Russia and Britain were suspicious of Iranian constitutional government, fearing it might produce a stronger Iranian state, less subject to foreign manipulation. In August 1907, Britain and Russia signed the Anglo-Russian Convention, which divided Iran into spheres of influence without consulting the Iranian government. Russia received a sphere in northern Iran, including Tehran, Isfahan, and provinces bordering Russia. Britain received a sphere in southeastern Iran, bordering India and Afghanistan. A neutral zone separated the two spheres. The convention treated Iran as territory to be divided rather than as a sovereign state. It demonstrated that constitutional reforms had not increased Iran's ability to resist foreign domination. Muhammad Ali Shah launched a coup against the constitutional government in June 1908. Russian-officered Cossack brigade troops bombarded the Majlis building. Constitutional leaders were arrested or executed. The Shah restored absolutist rule in Tehran. However, constitutional forces regrouped in provincial cities. Tabriz in northwestern Iran became a center of constitutional resistance. Constitutional fighters held the city despite a siege by royalist forces. In 1909, constitutional armies from Gilan and Isfahan marched on Tehran. In July 1909, they captured the capital. Muhammad Ali Shah took refuge in the Russian legation and then went into exile. His young son Ahmad Shah was placed on the throne. The second Majlis convened in November 1909. The constitutionalists had won militarily, but faced enormous challenges in governing. The second Majlis attempted to restore Iranian sovereignty and fiscal stability. In May 1910, the Majlis hired W. Morgan Schuster, an American lawyer, as Treasurer General to reform Iranian finances. Schuster worked to increase tax collection, reduce foreign financial control, and establish an independent treasury gendarmerie. His efforts threatened Russian and British interests. In November 1911, Russia issued an ultimatum demanding Schuster's dismissal and Iranian acceptance of foreign supervision of financial affairs. Russian troops advanced from the north. Britain supported Russia's ultimatum. The Iranian government had no military capability to resist. The Majlis refused to dismiss Schuster. The cabinet dissolved the Majlis in December 1911 and dismissed Schuster. The constitutional revolution had failed to achieve its goal of establishing effective sovereign government. Russia and Britain would not permit an independent Iranian state in their sphere of influence. The First World War brought additional disaster to Iran. The Iranian government declared neutrality in 1914, but neutrality was not respected. Russian troops occupied northern Iran. British troops occupied southern Iran to protect oil installations and supply routes to Russia. Ottoman troops invaded from the west. The war disrupted agriculture and trade. Famine killed hundreds of thousands of Iranians. Russian and British forces used Iranian territory for military operations without Iranian consent. The October Revolution of 1917 in Russia removed Russian forces from Iran, but created political instability. British forces filled the vacuum. In 1918 and 1919, Britain effectively occupied much of Iran and sought to formalize control through a treaty. The Anglo-Persian Agreement of 1919 was negotiated by British officials and a few Iranian ministers without Majlis approval. The agreement provided for British advisors in Iranian military, financial, and administrative affairs, British loans to Iran,